Welcome to Sleep Theories. Before we dive into tonight's tale, I hope you're settling in comfortably wherever you are in the world, whether it's late evening, the quiet hours of night, or perhaps you're listening during a peaceful afternoon. Take a moment to let us know in the comments how your day has been treating you, what time zone you're joining us from, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy uncovering the mysteries that history tried to bury. Tonight's story will take us deep beneath the surface of Scotland's most famous loch, where the truth is far stranger and more terrifying than any monster tale ever told. They told me to stop asking questions in 1987. 36 years later, I found the letter again, signed by a dead man, marked, Eyes Only, Project Ness Code. My name is Dr. Margaret Sinclair, and for 43 years I've been a marine biologist. I've studied everything from deep-sea trenches to Arctic ice formations, published over 200 papers, and received recognition from institutions across 3 continents. But none of that prepared me for what I discovered in Professor Hamish MacLeod's estate sale last autumn. Hamish had been my mentor at the University of Edinburgh back in the 70s. Brilliant man, specialised in freshwater ecosystems and acoustic mapping. He died quietly in his sleep at 91, and his family was clearing out decades of research materials. I went to pay my respects and perhaps salvage some of his older sonar equipment for my students. That's when I found the manila envelope wedged behind a filing cabinet drawer, yellowed with age and sealed with red wax. The kind of seal I hadn't seen since my brief stint consulting for government research projects decades ago. The letter inside was dated March 15th, 1987, Ministry of Defence letterhead, signed by Colonel James Whitmore, a man I knew had died in a car accident 3 months before the letter was supposedly written. Professor MacLeod, your recent inquiries regarding Project NESSCODE must cease immediately. The thermal readings and acoustic data you've collected are classified under the Official Secrets Act. Any further investigation will result in immediate termination of your research funding and potential criminal charges. The specimens you've documented pose no threat to public safety, provided proper containment protocols remain in place. Your cooperation in maintaining operational security is not optional. Destroy all copies of your findings. This communication will self-destruct in accordance with standard procedure. Column J, Whitmore Ministry of Defence Special Projects Division. The letter should have crumbled or faded after 36 years, but it remained perfectly preserved. More disturbing were the materials paperclipped to the back. Sonar readings showing massive objects moving through deep water chambers beneath Loch Ness. Thermal images of something generating its own heat signature at depths of over 300 metres, and handwritten notes in Hamish's careful script referencing multiple entities and breeding cycle observations. At the bottom of the pile, a single photograph, black and white, grainy but unmistakably showing something serpentine and enormous, captured mid-motion beneath dark water. On the back, Hamish had written, "They're not hiding it, they're protecting it." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Hamish's final years, how he'd grown reclusive, paranoid about his work being monitored, how he'd sometimes mention the old days at the Loch with a haunted expression, then quickly change the subject. I'd always assumed he was talking about routine field work. I was wrong. The next morning I began my own investigation. The first recorded modern sighting of the Loch Ness Monster occurred on May 2nd, 1933, when Alex Campbell, the Loch's water bailiff, reported seeing a creature with a long neck and small head disturbing the surface near Drumnadroshit. Within weeks, the story had captured international attention. Tourists flocked to the Scottish Highlands. Hotels were booked solid. The monster became Scotland's most famous export. But what most people don't know is that 1933 was also the year the Royal Navy began conducting classified submarine trials in Loch Ness. I found the connection buried in declassified Admiralty records, documents that had been gathering dust in the National Archives for decades. Operation Deep Water, officially described as acoustic testing of experimental submarine prototypes in controlled freshwater environment. The project ran from 1933 to 1939, then again from 1951 to 1962, coinciding perfectly with the most famous monster sightings. The pattern was too convenient to be coincidental. Every major Nessie photograph or witness account corresponded with periods of military activity on the Loch. The famous surgeon's photograph from 1934 taken 3 days after a Royal Navy submarine suffered a mechanical failure during testing, requiring emergency surface procedures. The multiple sightings in the 1960s, perfectly timed with NATO acoustic warfare training exercises. I reached out to Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a former Royal Navy sonar technician who'd worked on submarine projects in the 50s. She was 94, living in a care home in Portsmouth, her mind still sharp despite her failing body. "Loch Ness," she said when I mentioned my research, her weathered face growing pale. I wondered when someone would start asking the right questions. She told me about the strange readings they detected during the trials, objects moving through the water at impossible speeds, generating acoustic signatures unlike anything in their databases. The official reports classified these anomalies as equipment malfunction or thermal distortion, but the technicians knew better. "We tracked something down there," Eleanor whispered, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "Something big. The brass told us it was a Soviet submarine, but Soviet subs don't move like that. They don't dive that deep. And they certainly don't show up on thermal scans like they're generating their own heat." She paused, staring out the window at the grey Portsmouth harbour. The monster stories weren't covering up the submarine tests. The submarine tests were covering up the monster. We were down there studying it, trying to understand what it was, but every time civilians got too close to the truth, another blurry photograph would surface, another tourist would claim they saw something, made it all seem like nonsense. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "The monster wasn't the story, Dr. Sinclair. The monster was the cover." That evening I drove north towards Scotland, my mind racing with possibilities. If Eleanor was right, if the government had been studying something real in Loch Ness for decades, then what exactly were they hiding? The answer, I would soon discover, was far more disturbing than any lake monster legend. The geology of Loch Ness has always been unusual. Formed by the Great Glen Fault over 400 million years ago, the loch reaches depths of 230 metres, deeper than the North Sea. Its waters connect to an extensive network of underwater caves and fissures that have never been fully mapped. The perfect hiding place for something that shouldn't exist. I spent 2 days in the archives of the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, researching paleontological discoveries in the Highland region. What I found challenged everything I thought I knew about extinction and survival. In 1932, 1 year before the first modern Nessie sighting, construction workers building the A82 road along the Loch's western shore discovered something extraordinary. Embedded in 150-million-year-old Jurassic limestone, they found fossils of marine reptiles that shouldn't have existed in freshwater environments. Cryptoclydus, Pliosaurus, and several specimens that didn't match any known species. The discovery should have made headlines in paleontological journals worldwide. Instead, the fossils disappeared into storage at the Royal Scottish Museum, catalogued under a restricted access designation that required government clearance to view. I managed to examine the remaining fragments through a contact in the museum's research department. What I saw defied explanation. These weren't typical fossilized remains. The bone structure showed evidence of adaptation to freshwater environments, genetic mutations that suggested the creatures had been evolving, changing, surviving long after their supposed extinction. Dr. James Fitzpatrick, the museum's chief paleontologist, agreed to speak with me off the record. A nervous man in his 60s, he kept glancing over his shoulder as we talked in his cramped office. "Those specimens from 1932, he said quietly, "they were just the beginning. We've found similar fossils throughout the Highland region over the decades, always freshwater adapted, always showing signs of recent evolutionary activity, as if something survived the mass extinction and kept evolving in isolation." He pulled out a manila folder marked Restricted Access, Ministry Approval Required. "This is what really concerns me," Fitzpatrick continued, showing me photographs of bone fragments. These samples were collected in 1974 from sediment cores taken from the bottom of Loch Ness. The carbon dating puts them at less than 50 years old. Fresh bones, Dr. Sinclair, from creatures that were supposed to have died out 65 million years ago. The implications were staggering. Something had been living in Loch Ness, something ancient that had somehow survived extinction through millions of years of isolation. But the story didn't end there. Fitzpatrick hesitated, then opened another file. "There's something else, something I probably shouldn't show you." The photographs in the second file showed bone fragments with clear tool marks, surgical cuts, extraction points, evidence of scientific examination. The dates on the images range from the 1950s through the 1980s. Someone's been collecting specimens, he said. Not just studying fossils, harvesting fresh tissue from living creatures. The Ministry of Defence has been running a biological research programme connected to Loch Ness for decades. That night, alone in my Edinburgh hotel room, I stared at photocopies of the evidence. The Cold War had been about more than nuclear weapons and ideological supremacy. It had been about controlling biology itself, even if it meant waking up something that should have stayed buried. The question that kept me awake wasn't whether something lived in Loch Ness. It was whether that something was natural, or whether decades of government experimentation had created something far worse. The pattern of suppression became clear once I knew what to look for. Every legitimate scientific expedition to Loch Ness since 1960 had encountered the same obstacles: equipment failure, funding cuts, mysterious accidents, and data that somehow vanished or became corrupted. Dr. Robert Rines, the American inventor and lawyer who conducted some of the most sophisticated sonar searches of the Loch in the 1970s, had documented several clear contacts with large, moving objects. His underwater photographs, while disputed by skeptics, showed structured shapes that didn't match any known fish or debris. Rines believed he was close to proving the creature's existence. Then, in 1976, his funding was mysteriously withdrawn. A fire destroyed his equipment storage facility. His research assistants received job offers that required them to relocate immediately. The project collapsed within months. I tracked down Dr. Sarah Morrison, one of Rines's former team members living quietly in Vermont. She agreed to meet me at a small cafe in Burlington, away from phones and recording devices. We had them, she said, stirring her coffee with trembling hands. Clear sonar contacts, multiple photographs, even tissue samples from something we'd never seen before. Robert was preparing to present our findings to the Royal Society. Sarah paused, glancing around the empty cafe. That's when the men in suits arrived. British intelligence, they claimed, said our research was interfering with ongoing security operations in the area. They confiscated everything: film, data logs, even our personal notes. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. But that wasn't the strangest part. One of them, the one who seemed to be in charge, he looked at our photographs and didn't seem surprised. It was like he'd seen similar images before, like they already knew what we were finding. The suppression tactics weren't limited to foreign researchers. British scientists faced even more aggressive interference. In 1978, Dr. Michael Hassan of the University of Glasgow attempted to conduct a comprehensive biological survey of the Loch's deep waters. His research vessel suffered multiple equipment failures. His diving team reported feeling watched during underwater operations, and his final report was classified under the Official Secrets Act before he could publish it. Hassan refused to discuss his findings, even 20 years later. But his research assistant, Dr. Patricia Wells, eventually broke her silence. "We found structures down there," she told me during a tense phone conversation. "Artificial structures, not just caves or rock formations, built structures, metal frameworks, cables, what looked like observation equipment. Someone had been studying that loch for a very long time." The most disturbing case involved the 2001 expedition, funded by the BBC and National Geographic. Using state-of-the-art sonar equipment and underwater robots, the team planned the most comprehensive search in the Loch's history. The project had international backing, media attention, and support from the Scottish Tourism Board. 3 days before the expedition was scheduled to begin, NATO conducted emergency military exercises in the area. The airspace was restricted, boat traffic was prohibited, and the entire operation was postponed indefinitely due to logistical interference. The equipment, worth over £2 million, was later reported stolen from a supposedly secure storage facility. The insurance investigation was closed without explanation. The BBC never mentioned the incident again. But the most chilling suppression case I discovered happened in 1974, involving a university research team from Edinburgh. A young graduate student named David McKinnon had been documenting unusual sonar readings near the Loch's deepest point when he volunteered for a solo dive to investigate a promising contact. McKinnon descended to nearly 40 metres, following a sonar signature that showed a large moving object near an underwater cliff face. His surface crew maintained radio contact until 3:47 p.m, when his transmission cut off mid-sentence. The official report stated that McKinnon had suffered equipment failure and drowned. His body was never recovered despite extensive search efforts. The university launched an internal investigation that was quickly shut down by government intervention. I found McKinnon's diving partner, now retired and living on the Isle of Skye. Thomas Reed, 73 years old, finally agreed to tell me what really happened that day. David didn't drown, Reed said, staring out at the grey waters surrounding his cottage. His last transmission, he said he could see something in the rocks, something artificial. Metal structures, maybe 30 metres down. He was excited, said it looked like some kind of research station. Reed's hands shook as he lit his pipe. Then he screamed. Not a drowning scream, pure terror. The radio went dead, and we never heard from him again. But here's what they didn't put in the report. When we pulled up his diving line, it was cut. Clean, precise cuts, not torn or damaged by accident. The implications were clear. Someone had been operating underwater facilities in Loch Ness for decades, and they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. As I drove back toward the loch that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The same dark sedan had been in my rearview mirror for the past 50 kilometres, always maintaining the same distance, never overtaking or falling behind. They knew I was getting close to something they'd spent decades hiding. The question was whether they'd let me live long enough to expose it. Armed with Hamish MacLeod's coordinates and Thomas Reed's testimony about underwater structures, I hired a local fishing guide named Ian McBride to take me out on the Loch. Ian had been working these waters for 30 years, knew every inlet and underwater feature, and more importantly, asked no questions when I paid him in cash. We launched from Foyers on a grey October morning, the mist clinging to the water's surface like smoke. Using a handheld GPS unit, I guided Ian toward the coordinates from Hamish's files, a point roughly 2 kilometres southeast of Urquhart Castle, where the loch's depth exceeded 200 metres. "Strange place to go fishing," Ian commented as he cut the engine, our small boat bobbing in the dark water. "Always been something odd about this spot. Fish avoid it, birds won't fly over it. Locals call it the dead zone." I deployed a portable sonar unit I'd borrowed from the university, its screen flickering to life with ghostly green images of the loch's bottom. At first, nothing unusual, just the expected rocky shelves and sediment formations. Then, at 180 metres depth, the sonar detected something that shouldn't exist. Geometric shapes, straight lines, right angles that nature never creates. "Jesus Christ," Ian whispered, staring at the sonar display. "What is that thing?" The structure was massive, at least 50 metres long, built into the side of an underwater cliff. Metal framework, collapsed sections, what appeared to be sealed chambers or laboratories. Someone had constructed an underwater research facility in one of Scotland's deepest lochs, and it had been there for decades. I spent 3 hours mapping the structure, taking photographs of the sonar readings, documenting coordinates and measurements. The facility was damaged, partially collapsed, sections clearly abandoned, but extensive enough to house a significant research operation. Ian grew increasingly nervous as the day progressed. "We should go," he kept saying. "This isn't right. No one builds things down there." But I needed more evidence. Using a waterproof camera attached to a weighted line, I attempted to capture images of the underwater structure. The first several attempts yielded only darkness and silt, but on the 5th try, the camera captured something extraordinary. Metal frameworks twisted by some tremendous force, broken viewing windows thick enough to withstand crushing depths, and along one corroded bulkhead, deep gouges that looked almost like claw marks, too large and too precise to have been made by any fish or diving equipment. The most disturbing image showed a partially collapsed chamber with what appeared to be sealed tanks or containment units. Though the photograph was grainy and distorted by the water, I could make out labels on the tank surfaces. The text was partially obscured, but I could distinguish fragments. TO4, cold hybrid, sensitive tissue, and what looked like biohazard warnings. They hadn't been studying a naturally occurring creature. They'd been experimenting with it. As we prepared to leave, Ian suddenly grabbed my arm. "Listen," he whispered. From somewhere beneath our boat came a sound I'll never forget. A deep, resonant call that seemed to vibrate through the water and into our bones. Not mechanical, not natural. Something between a whale song and a distress signal, but with an intelligence behind it that made my blood run cold. The sound lasted nearly 30 seconds, then faded into silence. Ian started the engine immediately, his hands shaking as he steered us back toward shore. 30 years I've been on this loch, he said as we approached the dock. Never heard anything like that, and I never want to hear it again. That night, alone in my cottage near Drumnadra Sheet, I studied the photographs and sonar readings by lamplight. The evidence was undeniable. Someone had operated an underwater research facility in Loch Ness for decades, conducting experiments on something they'd captured or created. The facility was now abandoned, damaged, possibly destroyed by whatever they'd been studying. But the most terrifying question remained unanswered. If the laboratory was abandoned, where were the specimens? The answer would come sooner than I expected, and in a way that would change everything I thought I knew about what lurked beneath Scotland's most famous loch. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a former Ministry of Defence clerk named Margaret Thornton, who contacted me through an encrypted email after reading about my research in a small Scottish newspaper. We met at a roadside cafe near Inverness, two elderly women sharing tea and secrets that could destroy careers and end lives. Margaret was 78, grey-haired and soft-spoken, but her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who'd spent decades keeping government secrets. I processed the classified reports, she said quietly, stirring sugar into her tea with careful precision. Operation Ness Code, Operation Deep Water, all the underwater projects, filed away in archives that nobody was supposed to access. But I read them all. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a manila folder yellowed with age. Inside were photocopied documents, incident reports, casualty assessments, emergency protocols that painted a terrifying picture of what had happened beneath Loch Ness in the late 1980s. The files detailed what they called a Category 5 containment breach that occurred on September 14, 1987. The underwater research facility had been operating for over 2 decades, studying and attempting to breed what the documents referred to as Subject N-1, a large aquatic creature of unknown origin that demonstrated exceptional intelligence and adaptive capabilities. According to the incident report, Subject N1 had been successfully bred with genetic material from various marine species, producing several hybrid offspring designated N-2 through N-7. The breeding program was part of a larger military research initiative exploring the weaponization of biological organisms. Then something went catastrophically wrong. September 14th, 1987, Margaret read from the file. 0347 hours. Facility sensors detect multiple hull breaches in Laboratory Complex C. Emergency protocols activated. All surface support vessels ordered to maintain minimum safe distance. She paused, looking up at me with haunted eyes. 0352 hours. Final transmission from facility personnel report subjects have achieved coordinated escape. Communications terminated. No survivors recovered. The documents detailed the aftermath. The entire underwater facility was abandoned, sealed using controlled explosives to prevent further breaches. Official cause of the incident was listed as structural failure due to geological instability, but the real reports told a different story. Multiple large objects had been detected leaving the loch through underwater cave systems that connected to the North Sea. Sonar tracking followed them for nearly 40 kilometres before losing contact in deeper coastal waters. They didn't just escape, Margaret whispered. They left together, like they were organised, planned. The most disturbing revelation came in a follow-up report dated 3 weeks later. Marine wildlife agencies across Scotland began reporting unusual animal deaths. Seals, dolphins and fish found along the coastline with injuries that didn't match any known predator. The wounds were precise, almost surgical, suggesting intelligence behind the attacks. Specimen retrieval teams were dispatched to collect the carcasses, and the incidents were classified under national security protocols. The official explanation blamed unusual tidal conditions and possible chemical contamination, but the real cause was clear to anyone with access to the classified files. The creatures that had escaped from Loch Ness were hunting, learning, adapting to their new environment, and they were no longer alone. Margaret showed me the final document in the file, a memo dated October 30th, 1987, signed by the same Colonel Whitmore whose signature had appeared on the letter to Professor MacLeod. All Ness Code research materials to be archived under maximum security classification. Public inquiry into facility incident to be suppressed through standard disinformation protocols. academic research into Loch Ness phenomena to be monitored and redirected as necessary. Recommendation: maintain current cover story regarding monster sightings to discourage serious scientific investigation. Public fascination with folklore serves as effective distraction from actual security concerns. Note: tracking of escaped specimens remains high priority. Evidence suggests subjects retain homing instincts and may attempt to return to original habitat. Maintain surveillance protocols indefinitely. As I read those final lines, pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The government hadn't been hiding a monster. They'd been hiding the fact that they'd lost control of something they'd created. The tourist-friendly Nessie stories weren't just covering up the research, they were covering up a containment failure that had released genetically modified creatures into Scottish waters. Margaret leaned forward, her voice barely audible above the cafe's background noise. "There's one more thing," she said. "The surveillance protocols, they're still active. Whatever escaped from that facility 36 years ago, they're still tracking it. Still watching the Loch, waiting for it to come home." The implication sent a chill through me. If the creatures were still alive, still being monitored, then everything I'd discovered was just the beginning of a much larger conspiracy. And if they retained homing instincts, as the memo suggested, then Loch Ness might not be as empty as everyone believed. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going back to the loss, armed with underwater cameras and recording equipment. Whatever was down there, whether it was the original creature, one of its hybrid offspring, or something else entirely, I was going to document it. I had no idea I was walking into a trap that had been set decades ago, waiting for someone curious enough and foolish enough to discover the truth about what the government had been hiding beneath Scotland's most famous waters. My final expedition to Loch Ness took place on November 15th, 2023, exactly 36 years after the containment breach. I chose the date deliberately, wondering if there was any significance to the anniversary. I would soon discover there was. I hired Ian McBride again, despite his obvious reluctance to return to what he still called the dead zone. This time, I brought professional underwater cameras, hydrophones capable of recording low-frequency sounds, and a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, that could descend to depths of 250 metres. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, minimal wind, water surface like black glass. As we approached the coordinates of the abandoned facility, I deployed all my recording equipment, determined to capture definitive proof of whatever remained beneath the loch. The hydrophones immediately detected something extraordinary. Low-frequency calls echoing through the water, not the random sounds of fish or geological activity, but structured communications, patterns, responses, what sounded almost like conversation between multiple entities. "They're talking to each other," I whispered, watching the audio analysis display. "There's more than one down there." I deployed the ROV, its cameras cutting through the dark water with powerful LED arrays. At 150 metres, it reached the edge of the underwater cliff where the research facility had been built. What I saw took my breath away. The facility wasn't abandoned, it was occupied. The damaged structures had been modified, expanded with what appeared to be organic materials, formations that looked almost like coral growths, but with geometric precision that suggested intelligence. The creatures hadn't just escaped, some had returned and rebuilt their environment using the human technology as a foundation. As the ROV moved closer, massive shapes began emerging from the shadows. Not one creature, but several, serpentine forms easily 20 metres in length, moving with coordinated purpose around the facility. Their skin appeared to be semi-translucent, internal organs visible through bioluminescent patches that pulsed in complex patterns. But these weren't the primitive marine reptiles I'd expected. These creatures showed clear signs of technological integration, metallic implants along their spines, what appeared to be communication devices attached to their skulls, appendages that looked more like manipulator tools than natural fins. They'd been modified, enhanced. The breeding program hadn't just created hybrids, it had produced something that could adapt and improve upon human technology. As I watched in fascination and horror, one of the creatures approached the ROV directly. Its head was massive, easily 3 meters long, with eyes that showed unmistakable intelligence. It examined the camera with curiosity rather than aggression, almost as if it recognized what it was looking at. Then it did something that changed everything I thought I knew about these creatures. It spoke, not with words, but with structured sound patterns that my hydrophones translated into recognisable frequencies. The creature was attempting to communicate with the ROV, using acoustic signals that matched the technological signatures of human sonar equipment. It had learned our language, our technology, our methods of communication. I was so mesmerised by this discovery that I almost missed the most important detail. In the background of the camera feed, I could see other creatures working with pieces of advanced technology. Not the crude equipment from the 1980s research facility, but modern devices that shouldn't exist in an underwater environment. Satellite communication arrays, computer processing units, what appeared to be data storage systems. They weren't just surviving in Loch Ness, they were conducting their own research. The terrible truth hit me like a physical blow. The containment breach in 1987 hadn't been an accident. It had been a deliberate escape, planned and executed by creatures intelligent enough to understand their captivity and sophisticated enough to break free. They'd learned from their captors, adapted their knowledge, and possibly infiltrated human society in ways we couldn't imagine. The ROV's final images showed the lead creature holding what appeared to be a human diving helmet. Recent modern equipment with digital displays still functioning. Someone else had been down here recently. Someone who hadn't returned to the surface. As I frantically retrieved the ROV, Ian McBride grabbed my shoulder with an expression of pure terror. "Look at the shoreline," he whispered. All around the loch, dark shapes were emerging from the water. Not the creatures from the deep facility, but something else. Smaller forms that moved with bipedal locomotion, walking upright like humans but with proportions that were clearly non-human. They had been watching us, waiting for someone to discover their presence, and now they knew that their secret was compromised. As our boat raced back towards the shore, I realised the full scope of what we were facing. The monster stories, the government cover-ups, the decades of disinformation. None of it had been about hiding one creature in one Scottish loch. It had been about hiding proof that evolution wasn't fixed, that extinction could be reversed, that intelligence could be enhanced and directed toward purposes we couldn't comprehend. The creatures in Loch Ness weren't just survivors from an ancient world, they were the advanced scouts of something far more sophisticated than humanity had ever imagined. Everyone's afraid of the monster. But the real fear is what the monster proves, that we're not alone on this planet, that we're not the dominant species we believed ourselves to be, that somewhere beneath the surface of our world, something has been watching us, learning from us, and preparing for a future we can't imagine. And if Nessie is still out there, she's not the last. She's just the first they couldn't contain. As I write this account, safe in my cottage but knowing I'm being watched, I have one final revelation to share. The creatures didn't just escape from Loch Ness in 1987, they've been escaping from similar facilities around the world for decades. Deep lakes in Canada, Russia, Scandinavia, anywhere governments could conduct classified biological research away from prying eyes. The network is global. The conspiracy is deeper than anyone imagined. And the creatures we've been hiding from the public aren't just real. They are more intelligent, more capable, and more organised than we ever feared. They're not hiding from us anymore. We're hiding from them, and they know exactly where we are. Tonight's narrative is called Project Selene. a conspiracy thriller about a hidden archive, lost tapes, and the truth behind the moon landing. We'll journey through old NASA film reels, half-forgotten storage vaults, and the unravelling mind of a single archivist who stumbles upon footage that challenges the official version of humanity's greatest technological triumph, the 1969 moon landing. Our protagonist, Nolan Price, is no hero or super spy, just a quiet technician with a meticulous eye for detail. As he uncovers more evidence of an elaborate stage set and repeated take calls, watchers close in. The line between fact and hoax warps. Has the entire lunar narrative been meticulously faked? And if so, who orchestrated it? And how far will they go to keep it hidden? So find a comfortable position, maybe in bed with the lights low, or in a cosy chair as midnight drifts closer. Let your breathing slow. We'll sink into the flicker of analog film, that soft whir of a projector spinning old reels. Perhaps the gentle hum of a reel-to-reel tape resonates in the background. As we pass each chapter, you'll see how obsession can bloom from a single stray frame, and how the story of one small step for man might have been filmed under glaring stage lights all along. Remember, what follows is a work of fiction with a dash of what if, but sometimes those who ask what if unravel illusions that were never meant to be seen. Let's begin. With the hush of a locked storage facility, a reclusive archivist, and a battered cardboard box of tapes labelled Project Selene. Nolan Price stood outside the cinder-block walls of an abandoned government warehouse on the outskirts of Houston. The midday sun beat down on cracked pavement. He clutched a letter from Arcadia Aerospace Solutions, a private contractor that handled everything from satellite design to climate data. They had found references to ancient NASA reels in a sealed corner of a facility left over from the Cold War. The letter said Nolan, a freelance film restoration specialist, was chosen to digitize them. Urgent for historical archiving, they claimed. The pay was good, suspiciously good. Nolan stared at the weathered steel door. A single guard in a dusty uniform waved him in, already expecting him. Inside, the air was stale with the odour of old cardboard and decaying reel canisters. Flickering fluorescent lights revealed rows of shelves stuffed with NASA-labelled boxes, many slashed or water-damaged. This was typical. NASA's official archives were famed for mishaps, lost tapes of early rocket tests, missing telemetry from the Apollo missions. But something about Arcadia's hush-hush approach set Nolan on edge. A short, grey-suited woman introduced herself as Madison Harlow, acting as Arcadia's liaison. Without fanfare, she led him to a small side room, a makeshift editing suite they'd rigged with a battered 16mm projector, a spool rewinder, and a digital capture device. Stacks of reels labelled Apollo 11 RAW, Apollo 12 AVA, Saturn telemetry hull, and a curious mark, Selene, or SB footage. Harlow told him, "Your job's simple. Transfer them to high-resolution digital. Mark any anomalies or degrade. No public commentary, no copies. Understood?" Her tone was matter-of-fact but severe. Nolan didn't argue. He'd done hush projects before, and the hush came from corporate sensitivity or undisclosed research. Usually it was benign, so he shrugged. "Sure, I'll keep it discreet." She gave him a passkey, instructions on the alarm system, then left with final words. "We want it done swiftly, there's a schedule." Over the next few days, Nolan methodically fed reels into the projector, capturing them via a specialised scanner. In the first wave, he found typical NASA mission logs, rocket staging, crew training, pre-launch interviews. The colour had faded, the audio scratchy but recognisable, ground control chatter, astronauts reciting checklists. He found it a bit mesmerising, the old swirl of a countdown, boosters roaring. A shame these tapes had gathered dust. On day 3, he encountered the first odd reel. A label read, Apollo 11 Stage B, Take 3. The word Take 3 was strange. NASA mission reels usually said T+ timeline or mission date references, not take. He shrugged, loaded it. The footage flickered. A wide shot of what looked like a lunar surface mock-up. Astronaut suits in frame, then a voice off screen. Positions and action! The two suited figures hopped across the grey dust. One stumbled. A faint laugh was heard. Then another voice. Cut, we'll reset. The reflection's too bright on the visor. Nolan's heart pounded. This was no standard rocket or EVA footage. It looked like a staged film set, complete with overhead lighting rigs. The black backdrop was a poor simulation of starless lunar sky. You could see wires in the corner. Shaken, Nolan reversed the reel to confirm. Indeed, there was an assistant carrying a boom mic half hidden behind an artificial crater. The date code on the reel said 7/19/1969, the day before the public broadcast of Apollo 11's first moonwalk. Could this be a training simulation? NASA did have partial staging for practice, as yet the clapper, board reading take 3, and the director's voice implying an actual production unsettled him. He digitized it, flagged it as anomaly, and moved on. Over the next few canisters, normal mission footage resumed, so he chalked it up to a weird test shoot. NASA might have used it for PR or promotional B-roll. But that night, lying in a cheap motel, Nolan replayed the snippet in his mind. Why such hush around these older reels? NASA training footage was typically labelled as such. The next morning he dug deeper. Opening a battered can labelled Selene B, he discovered a reel that started with a NASA colour bar pattern, then abruptly cut to a behind-the-scenes environment. Men in suits conferring around what looked like a partial lunar lander set. A man in a white shirt read from a script. Lunar surface continuity, camera feed approach. We must ensure the horizon line matches the predicted lens angle. Another man wearing thick-rimmed glasses nodded. We fake it right, or we fail. Understood? Nolan's breath quickened. This was no trivial training. The group on tape specifically talked about fooling an audience. They discussed vantage angles to hide stage edges, how the overhead rig should mimic low gravity. One phrase jumped out. Public must see only the broadcast feed from the designated channel. He set the reel aside, heart pounding. This was conspiratorial gold. Actual evidence of a potential staged moon landing scenario. It defied everything taught in history. NASA had always faced accusations by conspiracy buffs about the MiP-9 moon landing being shot in a Hollywood set, referencing anomalies in flagged photos. But mainstream science easily refuted them. Yet these tapes, if real, it was the smoking gun. Then again, it could be a hoax, decades later staged footage. But the film stock was definitely vintage, and that the audio matched 1960s analogue characteristics. With sweaty palms, Nolan rummaged more, finding references to PSH Kubrick liaison. Could this be referencing famed director Stanley Kubrick? The name was never spelled out fully, but S. Kukub, the idea was insane. He'd heard rumours Kubrick was asked by NASA to film backup footage for crisis scenarios. The next reel's label read Moon Landing Studio Revan. The conspiracy was intensifying. That evening, a creeping sense of paranoia took hold. He locked the reels in a small closet. The quiet facility seemed ominous, as though someone was always behind the next aisle. Indeed, he glimpsed shadows near the corridor, possibly just the overhead lamp flicker. He decided to finish digitizing these suspicious reels quickly, keep copies, then reevaluate. Returning to the main workstation, he discovered his second shock. The tape labelled Apollo 11 Stage B Take 3 was missing. He'd left it on the spool an hour ago. Now it was gone. He checked the entire room, the desk, the case, nowhere. Another reel was in its place, labelled simply Selene E. Do Not Watch. This was no accident. Someone knew he'd found the suspicious content. They replaced it with a cryptic reel, possibly a warning or a booby trap. Heart pounding, Nolan placed Selene E. in the projector through Hosty overriding caution. The film began with static, then an image of an empty crater. A whisper reversed. This is not for you. Turn back. flickers of random rocket footage, spliced with the face of an older man in a half-lit room, mouthing silent words, then more static, end. Nolan realised he'd become entangled in something bigger. The label Project Selene likely referred to a top-secret operation controlling the lunar narrative. Could it be real? Or was it an elaborate mind game? He decided to approach Dr. Eliza Trent, a known NASA contractor turned historian, for help verifying authenticity. Because if these tapes were real, the entire Nuki 9 moon landing story was a crafted facade, and if that were true, the forces behind it wouldn't let the truth emerge easily. Thus, Nolan closed up for the night, feeling the weight of newly awakened illusions. Tomorrow he'd contact Dr. Trent. For now, though, he had to check the facility's locks, ensure no further reels vanished. A faint static-like voice echoed in his head. "We told them we went to the moon, and they believed." He shivered. If indeed the event that defined modern history was a cinematic hoax, the question loomed: who orchestrated it, and how far would they go to bury the truth? True to his plan, Nolan Price found himself the next morning outside a modest office building in downtown Houston, where Dr. Eliza Trent ran her small consultancy on aerospace history. She was a slight, sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s, known for her precise knowledge of NASA's public records. He introduced himself under an alias, but she recognised the name from an earlier phone message. You're the archivist with something urgent to show me." Inside her cluttered office, he carefully produced a hidden thumb drive with a few scanned clips. Dr. Trent popped it into her laptop. Scenes of the suspicious moon set played, along with bits of Selene B references. Her eyebrows rose. She zoomed in on certain frames, analysing the film grain, the speech patterns, the design of the suits. "This could be incredibly damning if authentic," she whispered. "But it also might be a sophisticated fake. I've seen hoaxes before. Let me cross-check specifics, production lot stamps on the film stock, the older NASA logos or pass badges." Nolan recounted the bizarre reel swaps, the reversed whispers on Selene E, and the missing spool from the previous night. Dr. Trent's fare turned grim. "If you're telling the truth, you're in danger. People don't just vanish these reels for fun. NASA had a long official stance that all major mission footage was stored, minus some lost in time, but never anything indicating a staged event." She paused, adjusting her glasses. There were rumours among older engineers, talk of a fallback plan if the real mission feed failed, but never solid proof. This might be it, or more, and they spent hours verifying minute details. A NASA mission patch visible in a corner, background voices referencing angle matches real module altitude. Dr. Trent began to suspect the tapes were genuine. She also recognised one face from an older NASA group photo, a certain black-suited figure who never stepped in front of official cameras, rumoured to be a media liaison. He was hush-hush, rumoured to coordinate with a big Hollywood name, possibly Kubrick. Dr. Trent offered a possible motive. During the Cold War, the pressure to beat the Soviets was immense. If real landings were uncertain, they might have staged footage as a failsafe. But from these tapes, it looks more elaborate. A total simulation? She exhaled. This changes everything. She urged Nolan to gather more evidence, but do it safely. That night they parted ways, planning to regroup once she did further checks in NASA's official archives. Meanwhile, Nolan returned to the old facility. The next morning he discovered the entire building locked, a renovation sign posted by Arcadia. Harlow, the liaison, was nowhere. Security had orders that no one enters, as the project was on hold. Furious, Nolan realised they intended to shut down any further rummaging. He tried to call Harlow's number, disconnected. The job was effectively over, the suspicious reels presumably removed. He retreated to his small apartment, heart pounding. If the conspirators had the tapes again, that left him with only a few digital copies. Enough maybe if the file survived. He backed them up to multiple flash drives, but as he tried emailing Dr. Trent more footage, an error flagged. File blocked, suspicious content. Some large-scale infiltration of his system was in effect. The Watchers were definitely onto him. In the swirl came a break. Rummaging through older unlabelled reels he'd already digitized, he found an odd snippet showing a man in a starkly lit corner, mid-70s style, glancing nervously at the camera. The film was scratched and audio was reversed. By reversing the track, Nolan deciphered fragments. Project Selene? Never meant to see. We built illusions for a greater cause. The man coughed, spat out. We lied. Or we lost the war. I left a final record in the Saturn archives. Then static. Confused, Nolan tried to see if Saturn archives might reference Saturn V rocket logs, but Dr. Trent had all standard Saturn V data. Possibly it referred to a hidden code or a separate repository. The man in the clip might be the archivist, or Red Hand, the rumoured original whistleblower. If so, his message suggested a bigger trove of evidence existed somewhere else, presumably safer than the official NASA channels. Maybe that trove spelled out the entire impetus behind faking, or partially faking, the moon landings. Nolan phoned to Trent again. She was frantic. Her home office had been ransacked, old NASA microfilms stolen, and suspicious men in suits loomed outside her building. She believed Arcadia Aerospace was a front for a deeper Black Ops group. She suggested they meet in a public place with the new reel. Nolan agreed, setting a meet at a busy bus station. However, the next day she never arrived. Her phone went dead. In parallel, an eerie wave of accidents claimed two older NASA retirees who'd been tangentially tied to the lunar era. Stroke, heart attack, but the timing reeked of cover-up. The media said nothing, overshadowed by typical news cycles, but a small corner of online conspiracy forums lit up. Moon archivist missing. Spike in NASA retiree deaths. Project Selene rumour intensifies. One forum user named Apollo Truth posted a cryptic line, "Look to LB7, the final broadcast is hidden." Nolan recognised LB might be Lunar Base 7, some old reference from the tapes. Or maybe LB7 was code for a hidden stage. He rummaged the digitised catalogue, eventually unearthing a label that matched. L. the Devontervolt footage. Opening it, he found bizarre outtakes, an entire set with rovers, multiple crater backdrops, and a partial script reading, "The audience sees only the final cut." Another snippet showed a NASA official saying, "We can't let them see the starfield difference. We'll keep it black." It confirmed the idea. The official moon footage was heavily edited, possibly reshot. As tension soared, Nolan sensed the Watchers nearing. Strange cars lingered near his apartment. The old building caretaker told him men asked about him, flashing some government ID. Fearing for his life, Nolan packed the digitised reels, stashed them in a battered suitcase, and hopped on a night bus out of town. He had one lead, a mention from Dr. Trent about the domain of the final transmissions, an alleged secret NASA comm station in the desert, which might hold old telemetry backups. If the Watchers stored illusions in reels, maybe the raw signals existed, real or fake, that confirm the staged transmissions. That might be the final piece to prove everything. Exhausted, he slumped in a bus seat, the flicker of highway lights passing. He felt haunted by the question. If they never truly landed men on the moon, what did that imply about decades of scientific progress, cultural memory, even the illusions of human achievement? The scale of deception would be monstrous. Or maybe the real landings happened, but the televised footage was partly staged. The puzzle was too big, but the Watchers clearly wanted him silent. He closed his eyes, drifting into half-sleep, hearing static-laced audio. "We told them we were first. The Soviets believed. We soared," voice whispered. Project Selene was the key to winning hearts, no matter the cost. He jolted awake, heart pounding. Could the cost now be his life? Thus, we near the threshold of the final confrontation, a hidden station, possibly guarded by those preserving the illusions, and a desperate archivist determined to reveal the truth, no matter the personal toll. The Watchers circle like wolves. Dr. Trent is missing, and the ghostly voice of the archivist from the 1970s beckons him onward to the final spool that might shatter the world's beloved myth. A dusty desert highway led Nolan Price to a sign half rusted and unreadable. The day was scorching, reminiscent of a place NASA once tested rovers or illusions of them. Lacking a car, Nolan walked hours from the bus drop-off, carrying a battered duffel, loaded with the crucial reels and a battered laptop. He was guided only by a rumour of a closed NASA comm station, rumoured to have moon feed backups. If he could find that station, he might locate the original uncut transmissions, or a final log from the Watchers themselves, validating the entire hoax. The Watchers were not far behind. They had resources to track phone pings, credit usage, license plate scanners, but Nolan used none of those moving off-grid. Still he sensed their presence, a drone overhead. He saw no sign, but the desert was wide, the sky empty of clues. Each day felt like an infiltration mission. At dusk on the second day, he stumbled upon a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, leading to a small cluster of squat buildings. A sign read NASA Remote Telemetry Number Caven Abandoned. But motion sensors beeped faintly. He clipped a corner of the fence, slid through. The main door was locked, but with a rusted handle. He pried it open with a crowbar borrowed from a shed. Inside the facility lay dark, stale air, thick with dust. A backup generator might still exist. With a flicker of old fluorescent lighting, he found a control room lined with defunct monitors, consoles labelled Apollo, Gemini, Deep Space TLM. A wave of awe overcame him. This was NASA's old telemetry link? Possibly used for receiving or broadcasting signals. If the Watchers wanted illusions maintained, they'd keep some gear here. Indeed, a corner door had fresh locks. Summoning nerve, Nolan forced it open, numban, revealing a smaller side lab with modern hardware. This wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. He rummaged, discovering a functioning terminal with a note pinned, Archive Selene, authorized access only. Bingo. He booted it, hooking up his laptop to the console. The system asked for credentials. He typed a guess. Selene. No luck. Another guess. Apollo 1969. Another fail. Searching the desk, he found a slip with partial codes referencing Tranquility Base. He typed it. The screen flashed green. He was in. File directories indicated Live Stage Feed 69, Simulation Mix Up, Broadcast Cut. This validated the idea that at least partial coverage had been simulated. Another folder read Archive Trent Comms. That name. Was that Dr. Eliza Trent? Possibly her attempt to gather data. He opened it, a partial video showing Dr. Trent forcibly questioned by men in suits. She pleaded, "We can't let them keep lying. People deserve..." Then the video ended. Nolan reeled with horror. She'd been captured. He had to act fast. The Watchers would realise the system was accessed. He found an old satellite uplink control ironically used in the 60s for deep space transmissions. If it still worked, he could broadcast a direct feed of these unedited files to multiple open frequencies, unstoppable by typical net censorship. A perfect final broadcast. He rummaged for cables, hooking everything up. The generator hummed. The old dish on the facility's roof squeaked into position. The console flickered with an option. Signal frequencies, low Earth channels, civil comms, even random radio bands. He could saturate them all. He selected the files, raw footage of the staged moon sets, outtakes with directors, plus newly discovered voice logs referencing, "We never left Earth, we built illusions." He included the Dr. Trent clip, proving Watchers had her. Tapping transmit, he waited for the progress bar. Slowly it climbed, 10%, 20%. Then boots on concrete outside. The Watchers had arrived. They swarmed in, flashlights cutting beams in the dusty corridors. He jammed a filing cabinet against the door. Gunfire erupted from the hallway. The broadcast was at 60%. If he could hold them off a few more minutes, the entire world would see the raw data. Shots tore through the flimsy door. Splinters flew. The Watchers forced an entry. Nolan, crouching behind a console, tapped a final override to lock the station's outer doors. The Watchers hammered at them from within. They must have cut an external fence, but the building's metal doors might by seconds. The bar rose to 80%. Sparks flew as the Watchers tried to break the console. Nolan fired a single-shot flare pistol he had found, more a diversion than a weapon. The Watchers scattered, returning heavy fire. The console took hits, but the broadcast still beeped along. 90% of them. In a swirl of chaos, the Watchers overcame the obstacles, stepping into the lab. Their lead figure, masked, raised a rifle. "Stop this now," he barked. "We'll kill you. No one else has to die." Nolan shouted back, voice trembling. "It's done. The world will see. Will see." The masked man tried yanking cables, but Nolan had built in multiple backup processes. The bar soared to 95%. The Watchers, furious, advanced with a lethal calm. 100% of the console beeped a final success. The data soared into the satellite channels. Unstoppable. The Watchers realised they'd lost. The masked man hissed, "Then we'll bury you." He aimed. A shot rang out. Nolan felt a searing pain in his chest. He collapsed, choking for breath, seeing the Watchers scramble to destroy equipment that no longer mattered. The feed was out. Unstoppable. In a swirl of darkness, he glimpsed a faint screen that read, "Broadcast to 12 frequencies. Transmission complete." At that moment, across various radio channels, TV backups, and online nodes, the footage played. People saw the raw set, heard staged arrests. They saw men referencing the final show, instructing astronauts how to move in moon gravity. The illusions were no longer rumour or partial. The entire mosaic was out. Social media exploded. Even those who had refused to doubt the official narrative watched in shock. By the next day, an unstoppable wave of meltdown overcame news outlets, overshadowing Watchers' attempts to disclaim. Nolan lay on the floor, vision fading. The Watchers, done with him, turned to vanish into the night, the clang of their boots receding. In his final moments, he recalled the reel with the old archivist's voice. "We told them we left Earth. We never had to." He felt a strange calm, believing that at least he had completed the mission. Perhaps Dr. Trent would see the broadcast and survive. The next morning, the world awoke to the shock of unfiltered footage spreading across every major and minor digital platform. Twitter, ephemeral streaming sites, pirate radio channels. The images showed the alleged set for the moon landing. Dusty sound stages, mocked-up craters, overhead rigging. Audio capturing NASA officials and alleged Hollywood technicians planning each scene. For many, this was an utter betrayal of faith in humankind's greatest triumph. For others, it vindicated decades of suspicion. Debates raged over how much was real, or whether some actual missions occurred, but the televised parts were faked. NASA and the White House scrambled to disclaim the footage, calling it forged propaganda. Yet the level of detail referencing actual mission rosters and behind-the-scenes technical talk was too well constructed for a simple hoax. Media responded in a frenzy. Reputable outlets tried to decode the timeline. Was it partial or total fakery? Did NASA still go physically to the moon while using stage broadcasts as a backup? The footage suggested a grand pre-arranged deception. A few ex-astronauts vehemently denied the claims, but curiously some had died or refused interviews. Conspiracy forums, ironically, now found themselves mainstream. Everyone had a stake in the truth. If the Martinet broadcast was faked, what else had been manipulated in history, and how many watchers lurked behind official illusions? Arcadia Aerospace, the front that hired Nolan, came under intense scrutiny. Their offices claimed ignorance, stating, "We believed it was standard NASA archival material." Their press statements were overshadowed by insider leaks that Arcadia was deeply connected to old intelligence circles. Government statements insisted an internal investigation was underway. All typical deflections. Meanwhile, the public demanded answers. Protests outside NASA centres soared. People carried signs reading, "We deserve the real truth." In the hush of those gatherings, tearful individuals who once admired Neil Armstrong's moonwalk felt gut-punched by the notion that they'd been shown a grand cinema piece. Sarah Voss re-emerged, having fled watchers. She published a scathing editorial, Project Selene, the greatest story never told, detailing her collaboration with Nolan, the missing reels, and the final broadcast. She confirmed that Nolan likely perished after ensuring the transmissions went live. She praised him as a tragic hero. Reaction poured in from across the world, sorrow that his name would be tied to the Moonlie revelation, but gratitude for exposing it. Hashtags nudged Project Selene and hashtag Moon Hoax soared. NASA's official line: "We categorically deny any mission staging. We continue to investigate maliciously edited footage." But cracks appeared among NASA retirees. Some older engineers told reporters about strange security around certain broadcast trucks in 1969. A caretaker from an old film studio stepped forward, claiming she once saw moon set pieces. In short, the edifice of absolute certainty crumbled. In a hidden place, elders from the original Project Selene, if that was truly the operation's name, hunkered down. They'd spent decades ensuring the official story overshadowed any rumours. Now, with everything public, the question was whether to attempt a final push to disclaim or vanish. Some watchers apparently vanished from the scene, leaving cryptic footprints. Possibly they'd moved on to new illusions. Possibly they recognised the unstoppable wave. Some found solace in the idea that humans still had the technology or impetus to land on the moon, but needed backup show. Others believe the entire Apollo program was a monstrous PR operation, that no real landing ever happened. A subset of the population refused to believe the footage at all, labelling it advanced deep fake. Society felt fractured, uncertain if to champion or condemn the memory of NASA's achievements. Meanwhile, Dr. Eliza Trent, recovered from captivity, gave a quiet interview confirming she'd found data logs describing the staged broadcast, though she suspected some real lunar missions did happen later, overshadowed by the initial fake spectacle. It was a political necessity, she suggested, in a time of desperate Cold War posturing. But the cost to collective trust is immeasurable. A year later, controversies raged on. New historians wrote The Selene Deception, exploring how the faked footage overshadowed a partial genuine mission. Hollywood churned out docudramas. Some revered the fallen archivist Nolan Price as a modern champion of truth. Conspiracy watchers called him the man who dethroned the biggest lie in human history. Meanwhile, certain scientists lamented that the overshadowing confusion might hamper genuine space exploration dreams. If the world concluded it was all illusions, interest in real missions might fade. In the dusty corners of a thrift store in rural Florida, a battered film labelled Selene C Launch Rehearsal 5 sat unnoticed among old VHS tapes, possibly a leftover reel not confiscated by watchers. A curious shopper glimpsed it, recognised the NASA imprint, and thought it might be valuable. They purchased it for $1. The can sat in a living room shelf. If they ever played it, they'd see a single take that never made it into the final broadcast. An astronaut stumbling under bright stage lights, removing his helmet mid-moonwalk, complaining about the heat. The can's label was faint. For final illusions, keep locked. Another piece of the puzzle, lost to time, or maybe waiting for the next curious soul. As for Nolan, rumours swirled that he might have survived. A fisherman off the Gulf Coast claimed to have given a ride to a quiet man with old film spools in his bag. A small-time blogger said she received an unsigned letter thanking her for defending the truth, but no one truly knew. If he lived, it would be as an eternal wanderer, overshadowed by the legacy that Project Selene was no longer hush-hush. Illusions can define an era, forging national unity or stoking pride. But illusions, once unmasked, can unravel decades of trust, leaving a battered society to pick up the pieces. In the hush of each new night, we might look at the moon, that pale disk in the sky, wondering if humans truly touched its surface as claimed, or if the cosmic stage was an elaborate reflection of ambition and fear. The search for the unvarnished truth, ironically, stands as a testament to the restless curiosity within all who gaze upward. In the end, Project Selene remains the darkest footnote in the history of human aspiration, a conspiratorial reminder that ambition without honesty can produce a triumph with no foundation. And in that final hush, the taped voice from an old NASA spool might echo, "We told them it was a great leap for mankind. In truth, it was a single step into the shadows." Over the next half hour, we'll introduce you to Agent Silas Rourke, Doctor, Liana Suresh, and Director Vance Halcor. A trio drawn into a web of secrets around a lethal pathogen called VX-73. As tensions mount and paranoia spreads, you'll witness how fear can become a powerful tool of control, and how a single whistleblower might spark either liberation or a deeper descent into conspiracy. Now close your eyes, or let them wander across these words, and follow me into the first moments of this dark, suspenseful odyssey. It started with a single headline: Mysterious respiratory illness detected in Port Maxwell. Within days, similar stories crept across the country, quiet at first, overshadowed by routine politics and everyday noise. Then, all at once, everything changed. The virus, designated VX-73, emerged as a swift-moving spectre, triggering coughing fits that escalated into respiratory failure for many. In a matter of weeks, schools were shut, businesses locked their doors, and entire metropolitan areas were quarantined under what officials described as temporary emergency protocols. For Agent Silas Rourke, a 42-year-old operative at the Bureau of Federal Integrity, BFI, life became an endless string of directives and dispatches. His daily uniform was a crisp suit layered beneath a bulletproof vest and a standard-issue respirator mask that itched at his face. He'd spent over a decade tackling threats deemed subversive to national security, from financial sabotage to espionage. Yet no training had ever prepared him for watching entire city blocks fall silent overnight. He walked the corridors of the BFY with practiced composure, scanning the myriad bulletins pinned on corkboards. The walls hummed with fluorescent lights that gave everything a stark, sterile glow. Digital screens listed the latest infection rates, projected mortalities, and newly declared red zones where infections raged unabated. Over the PA system, a recorded female voice repeated the same instructions every half hour. Stay indoors, maintain social distancing. All citizens must comply with the National Stabilization Bureau's guidelines. The National Stabilization Bureau, NSB, led by Director Vance Halcor, had been formed to centralize the government's emergency functions. Some called it necessary response. Others whispered about the creation of an all-powerful agency with little oversight. Halcor himself was a tall, imposing figure who frequently appeared on screens throughout the BFI complex, delivering updates about mandatory daily biometric scans and the development of a new vaccine, Unity Serum. Silas had known Halcor only in passing, enough to catch glimpses of a man driven by unwavering conviction. He recognised in Halcor that sense of unstoppable momentum, as though the security of the entire nation hinged on following his blueprint. Silas tried to set aside his personal misgivings. He was a loyal agent, bound to uphold the Bureau's mission. If the vaccine provided the solution to stop VX-73, so be it. Then one morning, Silas was summoned to a high-clearance briefing. He expected a new assignment along the lines of standard public compliance checks. Instead, he found himself in a cramped conference room, facing a handful of BFI higher-ups who spoke in hushed, clipped tones. The gist was simple. Alleged disinformation campaigns were circulating, claiming that VX-73 was not naturally occurring but lab-engineered. These rumours, the brass said, were fueling panic, turning citizens against the government's measures. Silas's job was to investigate any potential insiders leaking such nonsense. At first, he believed the directive to be legitimate. Disinformation in a crisis could be lethal, prompting civil unrest and undermining official responses. Yet as Silas pored over digital logs and tapped into encrypted chat rooms, he stumbled across an unencrypted file labelled simply Project Paragon, Preliminary. The file wasn't supposed to be on the BFI's server at all. It appeared as though someone with high-level credentials had hidden it behind labyrinthine subdirectories. Intrigued, Silas pried open the document. Inside were sanitised references to VX 73 months prior to the earliest official detection date. The language read, "Field tests planned in controlled sectors, monitor subject compliance and social response." A chill rippled through Silas. The deeper he delved, the more he found that pointed to a private biotech lab with direct ties to the Department of Defense. Another set of documents discussed funding from major corporate donors, massive pharmaceutical conglomerates that had a vested interest in vaccines, testing kits, and biometric devices. Confusion turned to a subtle dread. If these partial records were real, then the official narrative was incomplete at best, or outright deceptive at worst. Silas secured the files on a flash drive. Over the next few days, he quietly cross-referenced the data, trying to confirm whether Project Paragon existed. He took caution, covering his digital tracks with proxy servers. Even so, he noticed the BFI's internal security channels seemed abuzz with mentions of an internal breach. Fear knotted in his stomach. Someone else was on this trail too. He found short references to a doctor, Liana Suresh, apparently a virologist who once worked at a biotech facility codenamed Cerulean Labs. Her name popped up in correlation with antigen research and compliance metrics. The wording was bizarre. Since when did a vaccine program revolve around compliance? Yet there it was. VX-73 antigen trials show 62% compliance rate. Additional modifications required. The date? Nearly a year before the current outbreak. By the time Silas realised how incriminating his findings were, the hair on his arm stood on end. His imagination conjured scenarios he'd previously deemed paranoid. A virus unleashed intentionally. A vaccine designed not just to inoculate, but to control. He forced himself to remain calm. Conjecture was easy. Proof was everything. So he resolved to gather more. That night he left the BFI building with the flash drive tucked in the lining of his jacket. He tried to banish the creeping sense that eyes were trailing him. Outside, the city's main avenues lay deserted. Army trucks patrolled at intervals. Overhead drones whirred, scanning for curfew violators. Digital billboards displayed a single message across a black background. Unity Serum, your key to tomorrow. From a payphone booth, one of the last still standing, Silas called in a favour from a fellow agent he trusted. Someone adept at hacking behind the Bureau's firewall. The friend agreed to help, no questions asked, but Silas could sense tension in his voice. Everyone was on edge, unsure who was truly friend or foe. Silence had become a survival tactic. As he hung up the phone, the city's gloom pressed close, neon lights flickering across shuttered storefronts. In that moment, he wondered if the official explanation, VX-73 as a random mutation, was a purposeful lie from the start. If so, then the so-called Unity serum might be more than just a vaccine. A wave of dread consumed him. The next steps would determine whether he stayed a loyal operative or became a traitor to the system he'd served for half his life. At the next corner, a spotlight from a drone settled on him, scanning his face. He forced a neutral expression. The device beeped and swiveled away. Good. No red flag. Yet. As Silas ducked into the underground metro, he realised with grim certainty that he had stumbled onto something monstrous. For years he'd believed in the Bureau's cause, trusting that each operation served the greater good. Now he faced the possibility that the greatest threat wasn't the virus itself, but the hidden intent behind it. City by city, the VX-73 infection soared. Once bustling centres of commerce turned into ghost towns, patrolled by uniformed enforcers under orders from the National Stabilization Bureau. Curfews became absolute. Violators risked detention at newly established health containment camps. The mainstream media hammered a constant drumbeat of fear. The virus was unstoppable unless every citizen complied. For those still resistant, a single solution was presented day and night: Unity serum. On every channel, Director Vance Halcor appeared in a crisp suit, arms folded behind his back, proclaiming the vaccine's near-miraculous efficacy. Over 90% effective, his report said, a shining beacon of hope. Yet the rollout came with conditions. For public safety, those who refused the jab lost access to banks, public transportation, and official documentation. Within a month, entire swathes of the unvaccinated population found themselves in a twilight zone, forced to scavenge or rely on black market services just to survive. Amid the chaos, Agent Silas Rourke continued his secret investigation. By day, he donned his BFI credentials, working on official compliance enforcement tasks. By night, he devoured every new sliver of intel he could glean from that hush-hush file, Project Paragon. The deeper he went, the more horrifying the puzzle became. Encrypted references hinted at something hidden within the vaccine, a nano-emitter that lodged in the brain's limbic system. One internal document read, "Neurological regulation markers confirm mild sedation of aggression, increased docility, potential for broader cognitive modulation pending further trials." Silas felt physically ill reading these words. Could the government have hijacked a public health crisis to deploy a mind-altering device at scale? He needed answers. Over a secure channel, he messaged the elusive doctor, Liana Suresh, the scientist named in the files. She responded in short, coded texts, reluctant to trust him. Finally, after days of careful back and forth, she agreed to meet at an abandoned warehouse near the old docks. Silas arrived half an hour early, scanning the shadows for signs of a tail. No drones overhead, no suspicious vehicles. He waited under a flickering street lamp, the smell of salt water and rust filling the air. When Liana Suresh emerged, she wore a hooded jacket, her face partly obscured by a mask. Only her eyes were visible, tired, guarded, yet undeniably brilliant. She gave Silas a once-over, keeping a hand near her coat pocket. Possibly she carried a stun gun or pepper spray. Without greeting, she said in a hushed tone, "Why should I believe you're not with them?" Silas replied with the only currency that mattered, truth. He produced the flash drive and recited data from the files, his voice laced with quiet desperation. Liana's expression shifted from suspicion to grim acknowledgement. "I was part of the early design team for VX-73, she confessed. They told me it was to protect against a future pandemic, some advanced deterrent that would strengthen national security. We manipulated certain genetic markers to ensure the virus targeted specific alveolar receptors. But none of us realised the real plan, to unleash it upon the public. Her words ignited a spark of horror within Silas. He asked about the vaccine's rumoured mind control aspect. Liana hesitated, inhaling a shaky breath. It's not mind control, at least not in the sense of puppet strings. It lowers inhibitions, fosters compliance, makes people more susceptible to suggestions. Over time, it can dull critical thinking. They want a populace too numb to resist. Tremors ran through Silas. Even with his suspicions, hearing it plainly stated felt like a blow to the gut. They spoke in hushed tones for another hour, Liana finally handing him a battered thumb drive containing her original notes, the unredacted version that proved VX-73's artificial origin and the presence of a compliance mechanism in the vaccine. If they find you with this, you won't get a trial. They'll vanish you, she warned. From the surrounding gloom, a rat scurried across the broken concrete. Silas realised how precarious everything was, the squeaking rodent in the dark, the quiet lapping of the tide behind them, his own racing heartbeat. Danger lurked behind every shadow. Sensing they could stay no longer, the pair parted ways, promising to regroup soon. Back at the BFI, Silas carefully compartmentalised his roles: obedient agent in the daylight, clandestine researcher after hours. Meanwhile, the nation's capital sank deeper into fear-driven militarisation. Propaganda played ceaselessly on loudspeakers. Stay safe, stay indoors, trust the cure. Curfew drones soared over empty streets, shining bright beams to catch anyone outside after sundown. Social media platforms became inundated with pro-government messages, while dissenting posts vanished, labelled as threatening misinformation. Those who complied enjoyed a semblance of normalcy. Restaurants reopened for vaccinated patrons, businesses resumed for employees who presented a scannable immunity pass. Yet they all seemed more subdued, less likely to ask questions about privacy intrusions or the ever-increasing powers of the NSB. It was as though a hush had fallen over society, as if curiosity had been collectively tranquilised. Within government circles, Director Vance Halcor emerged as a national hero. Public polls, at least those broadcast on official channels, showed near universal support for his bold measures. He'd saved millions of lives, the anchors repeated. He'd stabilised the economy. He was proof that unwavering resolve could defeat chaos. Not a single mention of the billions in profits the corporate donors raked in, nor a hint about hidden modifications to the Unity serum. As the days passed, Silas found it harder to hide the turmoil in his gaze. He saw colleagues in the hallway, wearing forced smiles, praising Halcor's leadership. He noticed how many had begun to project a certain eerie calm, like their personal anxieties had evaporated. Could it be the effect of the serum? Silas tested a co-worker with a subtle question. Ever wonder why the lockdown measures ramped up so fast before the outbreak peaked? The man's eyes glazed momentarily, then he simply shrugged. Doesn't matter, O'Rourke. They keep us safe. He returned to his desk, more convinced than ever that Halcor's master plan was in full swing. The virus was the perfect storm to usher in sweeping surveillance and push a mind-numbing serum to the masses. And the BFI was part of it, or at least complicit in bearing the truth. He could keep quiet, or he could do the unthinkable and blow this wide open, risking everything in the process. One evening, Silas found a sealed envelope slipped beneath his apartment door. Inside, a single typed line. This is bigger than you think. They see all. The bottom edge was marked with an obscure symbol, a circle with a diagonal slash, like a stylized zero. He'd seen it once in a classified file referencing an underground resistance network. If these rebels wanted to contact him, it meant they believed he might be an ally. The tension hammered in his chest. He was dancing on a razor's edge, his loyalty to the Bureau, his conscience the unfolding nightmare. Taking a shaky breath, he powered up his laptop. A series of pings indicated a new assignment in his BFI inbox: track down a subversive known for smuggling contraband medical supplies. Silas realised with a jolt that the suspect's name had been flagged in Dr. Liana Suresh's notes. Another piece connecting the puzzle, and another reason the Bureau might soon brand him a traitor. He closed the laptop. Outside, the city lights glowed, reflecting off dark clouds pregnant with the threat of a new storm. If he hesitated much longer, it might be too late for everyone. The seeds of control had already sprouted, and every day they dug deeper roots into the world. Agent Silas Rourke watched from a distance as the unvaccinated families huddled together in the crumbling outskirts of Old Glendale. The press had labelled it a containment zone, but locals called it a human dumping ground. Living conditions were dire: sporadic power, limited sanitation, and roving squads of Unity enforcers scanning for anyone who might have hidden a child or avoided mandatory updates on vaccination status. The air crackled with dread. Days earlier, Silas had steeled himself to reach out to the symbol-bearing group implied by that cryptic envelope. If they were an underground resistance, maybe they could help him get the truth out. He had no illusions about personal safety. Once he exposed the deception behind VX-73 and Unity Serum, the entire apparatus of the National Stabilization Bureau would come crashing down on him. But each time he pictured the slumped figures in these zones, cast aside for refusing a forced injection, his resolve hardened. Through a secure channel, he arranged a meeting with a contact who went by the codename Sparrow. The location, an old print shop with boarded-up windows, rumoured to have once published subversive newspapers. Silas made sure to lose any trailing drones or BFI watchers by weaving through side streets. He wore a hooded coat, his respirator mask pulled high to conceal half his face. Inside the print shop, the musty smell of ink and paper still lingered. Boxes of unused flyers leaned against dusty presses. A dim light revealed a short figure in a makeshift black scarf. Sparrow. Their voice was muffled but direct. "You're late." Silas exhaled, nerves crackling. "I had to shake a drone." Sparrow nodded, then led him to a small back room. It was here Silas found half a dozen other figures, all clad in dark, worn clothes. A battered laptop sat on a folding table. A tangle of cables connected it to a generator. One by one, they introduced themselves with code names: Rook, Nightshade, Sahara, a clandestine cell of journalists, medics, and rogue programmers dedicated to fighting the government's stranglehold. "I have proof," Silas said, placing Dr. Liana Suresh's files on the table. "The virus was engineered, and the vaccine is rigged to manipulate behaviour." Silence fell over the group. The gravity of his statement hung in the stale air. Finally Sparrow spoke. "We've suspected as much. Over the past month we've been collecting testimonies, people complaining of unusual mental fog, the inability to feel strong emotions after receiving the serum. We even have ex-military sources who claim the NSB is funneling billions into a new wave of surveillance tech, but we needed a smoking gun. This might be it." Each set of eyes fixated on Silas. He handed them a flash drive, explaining how it contained Liana's unaltered research logs plus the Project Paragon blueprint. The group quickly scanned the data, verifying its authenticity. The sense of tension and excitement in the room was palpable. "We'll need to broadcast this globally," said Rook, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. "Not just post it. They have near total control over social media and mainstream outlets. We have to do something big, something they can't shut down in seconds." Nightshade tapped a map pinned to the wall, indicating a location in the Sierra Mountains. "This is an old radio tower with shortwave capabilities. We can piggyback on a communication satellite if we rig the hardware just right. It's off-grid, but the area's crawling with patrols. If we can get there, we can push the entire data set to thousands of independent radio operators around the globe. Within minutes, it'll be mirrored 100-fold. Sparrow turned to Silas. "We'll need you, your credentials, your knowledge of infiltration routes. We can't pull this off alone. Are you in?" Silas hesitated only a moment, the weight of countless nights of doubt pressing him forward. "Yes," he breathed, "I'm in." They set the plan in motion. Step 1. Connect with Dr. Liana Suresh. She alone could validate the data on air, lending credibility to the leak. Step 2, slip past the increased security net. The BFI had ramped up its internal manhunt for domestic threats, with Silas among the top suspects. Step 3, drive cross-country using an underground route, flipping vehicles and forging new IDs along the way. Step 4, ascend to the tower, circumvent security drones, and broadcast the files before the NSB realised what was happening. It sounded near impossible. Then again, they had no alternative. If they failed, the public might never learn the truth. The entire world could sink deeper into a docile acceptance of government decrees, enslaved by illusions of safety. Before dawn the following day, Silas discreetly left the BFI headquarters for the last time. He burned the few personal belongings that might link him to known associates. He carried only a go-bag stuffed with his essentials, a sidearm, extra ammunition, false IDs, basic medical supplies, and a small encrypted drive. Meeting Sparrow's team in a secluded alley, they set off in a nondescript cargo van toward Dr. Liana Suresh's hidden location. When they found her, she was in a state of near panic. One of her old lab colleagues had just been found dead, officially from VX-73 complications, though Liana suspected a targeted assassination. She greeted Silas with trembling relief, and after a brief rundown of the plan, she agreed to come. The group moved swiftly, forging through back roads, switching to new vehicles at safe houses. They travelled by night, resting in abandoned barns or shuttered motels. Each day brought fresh headlines about subversive infiltration, plastering Silas's BFI photo on every digital screen with the label "Wanted for Treason." One by one, the safe houses fell under assault. Word reached them that many in the resistance network were disappearing. The official story had exposure incidents, but they knew the truth. The government was eliminating anyone who dared challenge the status quo. Then tragedy struck within Silas's own group. On a rainy evening, they were ambushed by a special ops squad while crossing through a ravine. 3 of their companions, Sahara, Nightshade and Rook, were gunned down amid the blackened mud and pouring rain. Silas, Sparrow and Liana barely escaped with their lives, forced to leave everything behind. The heartbreak of losing them nearly paralysed the survivors, but there was no time to grieve. The mission had to continue. Battered and exhausted, the trio found refuge in a remote cabin belonging to an off-grid doctor sympathetic to the cause. They tended each other's wounds and mourned in sombre silence. Liana said in a trembling voice, "They died believing in something real. We can't let their sacrifice be in vain." Outside, the wind howled across the dark pines, as though the forest itself lamented the world's descent into madness. Silas stared at the flickering lantern light on the cabin wall, a single question echoing through his mind. Was it even possible to succeed against such overwhelming power? Only one path remained: press forward or let tyranny reign unchallenged. When dawn came, grey and cold, Silas Rourke, Liana Suresh and Sparrow prepared for their final push. They had enough fuel and supplies to make it to the Sierra Mountains, the site of the old radio tower. The plan was desperate: break into the facility, override the station's analog systems, and beam the unredacted Project Paragon files across multiple frequencies. If they managed even a few minutes of broadcast, it could be enough to spark a chain reaction of revelations around the globe. But the National Stabilization Bureau and the BFI were done playing cat and mouse. The day Silas had fled, DIRCIM Director Vance Halcor had activated something called the Silence Protocol, a draconian directive that authorized lethal force against any suspected misinformation agents. The official pretext: they threatened public safety and national security. That morning, the NSB seized control of the entire state media apparatus. They declared a level 3 lockdown in all areas believed to harbour conspirators. Through a stolen feed, Silas watched Halcor's latest broadcast. The director stood at a podium flanked by stern-faced officers. "We are at war against a virus, both biological and ideological," he intoned. We cannot allow a small band of anarchists to undermine our unified response. The new protocol is for the safety of us all. In the background, the NSB insignia shone ominously, a stylized eagle clutching a syringe in one talon and a shield in the other. Undeterred, Silas, Liana and Sparrow set out. They avoided main roads, weaving through Forest Service trails and dilapidated back routes. Sometimes they passed small clusters of houses with boarded windows, the silent inhabitants too frightened to emerge. Overhead, the skies held the threat of storm clouds, as though nature itself braced for a final confrontation. Midway through their journey, they encountered an unmanned checkpoint with an automated turret. The device scanned for vehicle transponders that matched authorized vaccine IDs. Of course, their stolen car carried no such ID. The turret activated. Bullets shattered the windshield, forcing them to abandon the car. They scrambled for cover in the nearby woods. Although Sparrow took a grazing shot to the shoulder, they managed to disable the turret by hacking its circuit box from behind. Out of breath, pulse hammering, they continued on foot, forging a path through the thickening forest. By dusk, they reached the slopes leading to the old radio tower. The structure loomed on a ridge above the tree line, its silhouette like a jagged sentinel against the darkening sky. Silas knew from stolen schematics that the tower's broadcasting equipment still functioned, albeit on emergency power. The next challenge, the cluster of heavily armed drones swirling overhead. Huddled behind a large boulder, 3 conspirators surveyed the scene. The tower stood behind a chain-link fence lined with razor wire. A single guard post at the main gate bristled with sensors. Several black SUVs were parked by the facility's entrance. This was no ghost station. The BFI or NSB had anticipated their move. Lights glowed ominously in the windows. They'd walked into a trap. Sparrow's face, partially shadowed by a hood, was stoic. "We can't just walk away now. We'll never get another chance." Liana, her trembling hands betraying her fear, nodded. "I can handle the tower's interior systems. If you can keep them off my back, I'll get the broadcast live." Silas clenched his jaw. He could feel the weight of the fallen friends who had fought and died for this. "Let's do it," he said, chambering a round in his sidearm. They timed their approach to slip between drones, scaling a rocky outcrop behind the fence. Once in position, Sparrow used wire cutters to snip through the chain link. The alarm was immediate, a shrill fiend ripping through the air. Flashlights bobbed in the darkness, voices shouting. They sprinted for the tower's rear entrance. Gunfire echoed as the guard station unleashed a volley. Their hearts thundered. Slivers of bullet impact sparked off the metal scaffolding. Silas returned fire, not aiming to kill, but to suppress. A guard collapsed with a cry, while others dove behind cover. Liana, adrenaline coursing through her veins, ducked beneath a half-raised security shutter and slipped into the tower's main corridor. Inside, ancient wiring snaked along walls plastered with peeling paint. Flickering emergency lights revealed a central control room. Liana lunged at the control panel, typing frantically to override passcodes. She plugged in the flash drive, eyes scanning lines of code. Sparrow hovered by the doorway, pistol drawn, scanning for pursuers. Suddenly, a staccato burst of gunfire rattled the hall. Sparrow fired back, giving Silas time to slam a door shut and wedge a broken chair beneath the handle. Sweat poured down his temples. "Hurry, Liana," he gasped, holding his side from a grazing bullet wound. Her fingers danced across the console. "I'm uploading now, transferring everything to the shortwave frequency. We're pushing it to ham operators worldwide. They'll replicate it across data networks we can't even track." A swirl of static hissed from overhead speakers, punctuated by electric pops. Then it happened. A thunderous blow tore the door off its hinges. BFI soldiers in dark tactical gear poured into the control room. Sparrow fired once, twice, but was tackled to the ground. The muzzle flash illuminated Director Halcor himself, stepping through the smoke, flanked by heavily armed agents. His cold, piercing gaze found Silas, as if marking a final betrayal. Liana managed to press one last keystroke. Transmission at 90%, she shouted, triumphant desperation in her voice, but in a flash a bullet ripped through her chest. She staggered, gasping, blood staining her clothes. Silas, consumed by fury, raised his weapon. Before he could steer, a bullet tore into his shoulder, spinning him to the floor. Blood roaring in his ears, he saw Halcor approach. "You should have stayed loyal, Rourke," the director said softly, pistol aimed. "Look at the chaos you've caused. All for what? Lies. You think you're saving them from fear, but fear is what binds society together. Without it, we have anarchy." Across the console, a blinking message glowed. Transmission completed. Silas let out a ragged breath. It was done. The world would see. He glimpsed Liana's form crumpled on the floor, eyes fluttering closed. Soldiers pinned him down, muzzle pressed against his head. Darkness danced at the edges of his vision, cold seeping through every nerve. Yet he clung to a single thought. At least the truth was out there now. Whether or not it would matter, no one could say, but for a moment he felt a faint glimmer of hope, overshadowed by the sting of betrayal and the stench of blood. Then came the shot, and everything went black. Morning broke over a city in turmoil. Media outlets across the globe received a sudden influx of bizarre files labelled Project Paragon. Blueprints, memos, emails exposing the orchestrated nature of the VX-73 outbreak and the manipulative design of Unity Serum. For a few breathless hours, independent stations and citizen journalists shared the trove, appalled at the revelations. Social media feeds erupted with shock, anger and confusion, but the official response was swift and merciless. Government spokespeople denounced the leaked materials as AI-generated misinformation designed to sabotage public health efforts. Fact-checkers from major media networks, many owned by the same corporations complicit in the scheme, released scathing articles questioning the authenticity of the files. The NSB dismissed the entire broadcast as a last-ditch effort by domestic terrorists, claiming the real objective was to discredit life-saving measures and sow chaos. Director Vance Halcor made another nationwide address, insisting that the virus was real, which it was in a way, and that the vaccine remained humanity's only hope. He claimed that unscrupulous actors, like Silas Rourke, had exploited the crisis to promote anti-government hysteria. Screens across the nation showed Silas's face next to the words, "He lied to protect you." The tagline implied that Rourke's so-called evidence was not only fraudulent, but a dangerous attempt to undermine everything the people had sacrificed for. Within hours, mainstream platforms scrubbed all references to Project Paragon. Accounts that posted the files were suspended or banned. The media repeated a unified refrain. The single source of truth is the NSB. Large swathes of the public, already terrified and half sedated by the vaccine's compliance mechanism, swallowed the official line. Protests flared in a few cities, but they were quickly quelled by an emboldened security apparatus. Drones circled overhead, delivering gas canisters that dispersed any crowds. Some corners of the internet, especially fringe communities in the dark web, continued dissecting the files, finding them alarmingly consistent with known events. A handful of renegade journalists tried to publish stories or host live streams with doctors who'd seen the side effects firsthand, but each digital channel soon vanished, labelled a threat to national stability or hammered by bot armies that drowned the truth in spurious disclaimers. Meanwhile, in the hush of a suburban neighbourhood, a woman wearing a black armband stepped out of a government vehicle to deliver condolences to Silas's next of kin. The official story: he had died in a terrorist shootout while attempting to sabotage vital infrastructure. No mention of the bullet that ended him with Director Halcor standing overhead, or of the battered body of Dr. Liana Suresh found nearby. The Bureau of Federal Integrity updated its internal logs, listing Silas Rourke as deceased, traitor to the state. And that was that. The world churned on, battered by more virus mutations. The vaccine was rebranded with updates, Unity Serum Plus, promising an even safer tomorrow. New mandates required that all children receive the serum upon turning 5 years old. Biometric scanners became ubiquitous. One needed only a palm scan or retina check to buy groceries, open bank accounts, or pass through transit gates. Privacy, it seemed, was a distant memory from a more innocent age. Yet pockets of doubt refused to be extinguished. Whispers spread in the hush of hidden gatherings, in hushed basement chats or encrypted group threads. Some had witnessed the brutal arrests of those who dared question the system. Others recalled loved ones who changed after taking the serum, becoming pliant, losing the spark of curiosity. They recounted flickering glimpses of the Project Paragon files before everything was shut down. The question lingered: had Silas Rourke and Dr. Liana Suresh exposed the greatest deception in modern history, only to be discredited by a well-oiled propaganda machine? In a small classroom on the outskirts of a major city, a teacher stood before rows of young students, all wearing mandated masks. Posters on the walls depicted a bright, sanitized-toned future, each featuring the NSB emblem and the phrase, "Order through unity, safety through silence." The teacher's gentle monotone instructed the children on the virtues of cooperation and the dangers of subversive thought. She tapped a touchscreen that displayed short videos praising director Halcor's heroism against the dreaded VX-73. At the back of the classroom, a quiet child named Elias fiddled with the corner of his desk, glancing away from the screen. His gaze settled on a faded poster peeling off the far wall, an old public safety bulletin featuring Silas Rourke. The words "he lied to protect you" were stenciled across the man's stern face. For reasons Elias couldn't articulate, he felt a pang of curiosity. Who was Silas Rourke, really? Why did the man's eyes in the poster look so determined, even beneath the scrawled condemnation? The teacher never mentioned him except to parrot the official line, "He sowed confusion, he endangered our unity." Yet Elias felt an inexplicable sense that there was more to the story. The child blinked, shifting in his seat as the teacher droned on about national heroes. Outside the window, the sun shone on a row of silent drones passing overhead. The hush of compliance blanketed the world, broken only by faint echoes of those who once cried out for truth. Did Silas Rourke really lie, or was he telling a truth too dangerous to be heard? At recess, while the other children lined up for their biometric scanning, Elias lingered by a worn patch of grass, letting the sun warm his face. The wind whispered across the playground, carrying with it the ghost of a question. He closed his eyes, imagining for a moment a different world, one shaped by the knowledge rather than fear, connection rather than silence. The fleeting vision vanished as a safety officer called his name, scanning a code on his wristband. Then the moment was gone. Far away, in a government archive warehouse, the battered remains of Silas Rourke's personal effects lay sealed in a box. Among them, an encrypted data drive that no official had bothered to open. It held echoes of a man's last stand, his unwavering conviction that the public deserved to know the truth behind VX-73 and Unity Serum. And maybe, somewhere, somehow, those echoes might still resonate in the hearts of the few brave souls who refused to let doubt die. Years later, in the quiet gloom of a shuttered radio station deep in the mountains, a teenage boy stumbled upon a dusty crate marked with faded letters. SR. Inside, he found an old laptop and a series of scribbled notes. When he booted the machine, surprisingly still functional thanks to an ancient generator, a final video file blinked onto the screen. Silas Rourke appeared, face drawn, eyes resolute. His recorded voice spoke like a message in a bottle from a lost era. "I'm not sure if you'll ever see this, but if you do, then you know the official story about VX-73 and Unity Serum was a lie. We tried to warn the world about the real agenda, not just to cure a pandemic, but to tighten a grip on every aspect of human life. And if you found this, you might be willing to stand up where we fell." Static crackled across the screen. Silas continued, quieter now. "You were never supposed to know, but now that you do, what will you choose?" The video ended abruptly, leaving the boy staring at the final frozen frame of Silas's determined face. Outside, the drone of wind echoed along the ridge. Clutching the notes, the teen took a trembling breath, feeling the weight of a legacy that demanded courage. He glanced at the peeling label on the crate. Project Paragon Files. A spark of possibility flickered in his eyes, hope that maybe, just maybe, truth could yet break through the silence. And so another story began. Our story is called False Skies, a conspiracy thriller about a government's darkest deception and the whistleblower who exposed it. It imagines a world where the worst terror attack in modern history was not only foreseen, but deliberately orchestrated to spark endless war and funnel billions into a sprawling military-industrial complex. Now, 2 decades later, an unassuming former FBI data analyst named Thomas Keane leaks hidden documents that point to a monstrous betrayal and becomes the most wanted man in the nation. Pursued by a shadowy agency determined to keep the official version sealed, Keane races to share the truth with a public reeling from revelations that might reshape the entire post-attack world order. If you find your eyes growing heavy at any point, that's okay. This story is meant to be richly detailed. Perhaps you'll drift to sleep while pondering how fear can become a profitable enterprise, or maybe you'll stay riveted till the final word, uncovering each layer with breathless suspense. Either way, I hope you come away with new insights into how power, once obtained, can cling fiercely to the shadows. Shall we begin? Then settle in, let your breathing slow, and imagine the flicker of old computer screens, top-secret binders, and a few missing pages that change the course of entire nations. This is False Skies, told in 5 parts, each revealing a deeper rung of the labyrinth. Listen closely. The greatest secrets often hide in the quiet corners of official stories. Thomas Keane didn't feel like a revolutionary when he first pressed send. He was simply a man weighed down by guilt, holding a flash drive stuffed with revelations that haunted him for years. The file name he'd chosen, a Black Dust, gave no hint to the explosive contents. A trove of classified FBI memos, shipping manifests, and encrypted communications that, if authenticated, would confirm every darkest rumour about the worst terrorist attack in modern memory. The day of the leak dawned cloudy, ironically anticlimactic for a moment that might reshape history. Keane sat in a dingy motel room near a dusty highway, a battered laptop perched on a wobbly table. The place smelled of stale coffee and regret, but it had functioning Wi-Fi. He checked his secure connection one last time, heart thrumming. With trembling fingers, he uploaded Black Dust to an overseas whistleblower website known for releasing hidden archives. He paused, typed a short note, for the thousands who died and the millions misled. Then he pressed send. Within the hour, that file reached multiple journalists and a global news outlet with a reputation for defying government censors. The outlet's editorial board pored over it, verifying bits of data in a hush of excitement and alarm. By the end of the day, the first breaking story appeared online, overshadowed by disclaimers. Unverified documents claim to reveal inside plot behind 20-year-old attack. Skeptics rolled their eyes. Conspiracy theorists hailed it as the smoking gun they'd always wanted. Most mainstream media initially dismissed it, an editing glitch, a potential hoax, or AI-generated forgery, the official line insisted. Yet some found the content too consistent to be random fakes. A set of typed memos from high-level intelligence briefings dated months before the attack, discussing the necessity of a catalytic event to unify public support for indefinite overseas campaigns. Detailed logs showed insurance policy expansions on certain tower floors days prior. Even stand-down orders for certain war games suspiciously matched the real timeline. Keane watched from his motel room's flickering TV as a breathless anchor tried to explain the leak, disclaiming that the White House calls it foreign propaganda. He sighed. The official denial had begun. Next would come the manhunt for the leaker. He closed his laptop, stuffed it in a bag and left the motel. Time to vanish. He'd served in the FBI's data analytics wing for nearly a decade, compiling anomaly reports around that fateful day. Step by step, he realized too many coincidences tied private defense contractors, intelligence heads, and financial bigwigs, all who profited from the subsequent wars. He quietly copied reams of old files, awaiting the day he had the courage to blow the whistle. That day had come. Elsewhere, powerful forces mobilized. The intelligence community's upper echelons recognized the name Thomas Keane from previous security audits. They suspected him. Within hours, calls went out from a hush-hush division to find him, brand him as a threat to national security. The director of an ultra-secret agency, Eldridge Shaw, personally oversaw the containment plan. He believed the official story must remain unchallenged, or the entire post-attack order might unravel. By midnight, bulletins labelled Keane suspected hacker and domestic threat. Agents started combing digital footprints, scouring camera feeds from near the FBI building. Shaw himself made a call to a contact at the large media conglomerates, instructing them to bury coverage of the story until further notice. The compliance was near instant. Mainstream news gave minimal airtime to the leak, overshadowing it with other headlines. But the genie was out of the bottle. On social media, the hashtag #BlackDust soared, with amateurs dissecting every memo line. A few data experts cross-referenced the IP addresses in the communications, linking them to known government subdomains. Even the partial revelation stunned the public. If the documents were genuine, it implied that some element within the US establishment not only predicted but abetted the terror event, ensuring maximum casualties for maximum political effect. The phrase false skies emerged, referencing how the public's reality had been manufactured like a painted ceiling above them, concealing the real orchestrators. Within a day, small protests flared outside federal buildings in major cities. People demanded clarity. The government's official statement repeated the forgery or foreign propaganda claim. That evening, hackers with anarchy streaks threatened to leak more verifying files if the mainstream media didn't pick it up. Tensions soared. Meanwhile, the stock market wobbled as rumours of insider deals from decades prior re-emerged. Some corporations connected to military contracting faced plunging shares. Keane watched from a safe house now, a friend's abandoned cabin in the woods. He had only the radio for news, and the swirl of distrust and fury filtered through the static. He dreaded how quickly the establishment might label him a traitor. Indeed, the next morning the FBI publicly named him as a prime suspect in a mass leak of classified data, painting him as an extremist. His old colleagues, uncertain, gave no comment. But behind the scenes, many believed the documents might be real. After all, they recognized Keane's skill in combing data for anomalies. Among the swirl stood a figure named Sarah Voss, an investigative journalist blacklisted from major networks for challenging official 9/11 narratives in the past. She recognized the pattern in these newly leaked documents. They matched puzzle pieces she'd glimpsed in hushed conversation with insiders. She reached out to the new site that hosted the files, leaving an encrypted message, "I can help verify. Let me speak to the source." That message eventually found its way to Keane via an online confidant, setting the stage for an alliance that might shake the entire narrative. Thus, from a dusty hideout, Keane typed a coded reply. The story's real race began. Could he deliver evidence to a credible journalist and blow the entire false narrative wide open before the apparatus of Homeland Security, the very system built on the official Sporseon, crushed him? The next step would be forging that alliance with Voss and hoping her instincts for truth outweighed her fear of retribution. For if the government's darkest deception was about to be exposed, those who profited from war would not hesitate to silence him, or anyone else, to keep the official illusions intact. 2 days after the leak, the national conversation roiled in confusion. Official channels insisted the Black Dust documents were an elaborate hoax. Yet smaller media sites posted side-by-side comparisons with legitimate CIA or FBI formatting, showing consistent digital footprints. The public found itself caught between an official narrative and a swirling impetus to question everything. Some believed wholeheartedly in the new revelations, others recoiled or felt threatened by the idea that the last 2 decades of conflict might have been orchestrated. Thomas Keane was already on every national watch list. He'd been a mid-level FBI data analyst until 2 years prior, known for thoroughness but also for quietly raising flags about inconsistent intelligence reports pre-9/11. The day he left the bureau, no one suspected he'd spent months copying old files slated for permanent seal. Now his old supervisors told the press that he was mentally unstable, harbouring extremist theories. They withheld mention that those same theories had nearly led to internal inquiries years ago, until higher-ups quashed them. In a suburban neighbourhood outside the capital, a black SUV pulled up to a modest house. 4 men in plain suits stepped out. They were from a specialised domestic counter-intel unit, effectively an arm of the Black Archive, a covert group rumoured to be tied to intelligence and corporate interests. They forced the occupant, a middle-aged data engineer who once worked with Keane, to open his home computer. They rifled through his messages, seizing any mention of Thomas or Black Dust or files. This was repeated across multiple homes of ex-FBI colleagues, all without official warrants. The Watchers answered to a higher chain, operating in the shadows. Director Eldridge Shaw, head of a new consolidated intelligence agency formed after 9/11, presided over these manhunts from a sleek government tower. He remembered the day of the attacks vividly, the chaos that allowed the Patriot Act and massive expansions of surveillance. He'd advanced quickly by endorsing these expansions and forging alliances with top defence contractors. Now, seeing the leaked docs threaten that entire architecture, Shaw was determined to snuff out the source. Reeve, or Keane, whatever his name is, must be found, he told subordinates. We cannot let fantasies unravel 2 decades of progress. As the manhunt escalated, Keane lurked in the outskirts. He recognised the checkposts on highways, the routine scanning of licence plates. He switched vehicles, used an old identity pass, and avoided all major city centres. He survived on snack bars and occasional small store purchases with cash only. At night, he found a cheap motel, paying in a borrowed name. Every moment felt like it might bring a black SUV squealing into the lot. The tension weighed on him, gnawing at his nerves. Sarah Voss, the investigative reporter, finally established contact with him through a secure chat app. "We need to meet," she wrote. "I can help verify these files properly. People trust me to an extent in the alternative media sphere. We must do it soon. The window is closing." Keane hesitated, knowing any in-person meeting risked being traced. But if they never took that risk, the documents might remain in a swirl of unverified rumour, easy for the mainstream to dismiss. They arranged a rendezvous in a small coastal town's library after hours. The next day, as Keane approached the library, he spotted an unmarked sedan idling in the parking lot. Fear pricked him. Watchers might be tailing. To confirm, he looped around the block. The sedan didn't move, possibly just a random visitor. Summoning courage, he stepped inside. Voss, a tall woman with a worn leather jacket, recognised him from the scattered photos circulated in the media. They sat in a corner among dusty shelves. She offered a handshake, voice calm but urgent. "Thomas, I believe you. The official story has always had holes. Let's finalise the proof so we can break it wide open." Keane exhaled relief, sliding a small USB drive across the table. "This is a more complete set than what was posted. Contains direct memos about the stand-down orders, the deals with defence contractors, the flight path manipulations, also internal emails referencing the hijackers as assets gone rogue." He paused, tears flickering in his eyes. "They used the tragedy for indefinite war, Sarah. They let it happen, or worse, engineered it." Sarah's breath caught. She skimmed a few files on her laptop, eyes widening at references to bank accounts, coded references to Operation Silence. She nodded. "This is explosive, but we need a big platform, enough to force coverage. If we just post it on my blog, they'll discredit or block it. We'll get shut down." She explained a plan. Find a mainstream journalist with a rebellious streak, or do a well-publicised live event that too many watchers can't black out entirely. Suddenly, a muffled scuffle at the library entrance startled them. A figure in dark clothes peered in, Keane tensed. Sarah pressed the laptop closed. They ducked behind shelves as footsteps approached, but the library's old caretaker bumbled out, greeting them obliviously. The suspicious figure, glimpsed through the glass, retreated. Possibly a false alarm, possibly a watcher verifying the location. They parted ways quickly, agreeing to meet again in 48 hours near a major city, planning an infiltration of a local news station that might still allow an unfiltered broadcast. Danger soared. If watchers caught wind of their plan, they'd likely come down with lethal force. That evening, Keane received a frantic text from a friend who had once helped him interpret old FA logs. "One of our guys is dead. A boat accident. They're picking us off." The message cut short. Keane shuddered. The watchers had begun eliminating secondary sources who could confirm the leak's authenticity. He realised the ephemeral window for truth was closing. On the streets, protests flared up as rumours swirled of official foreknowledge. Some saw it as disrespectful to the memory of the victims. Others believed the truth must come out no matter how painful. The government, for its part, ramped up a rhetorical war on misinformation. Director Shaw delivered a short, ominous address, vowing that domestic agitators spreading baseless conspiracies will be brought to justice. Among the swirling chaos, Sarah discovered partial references in the documents to a deeper archive. The Saturn Files, an intelligence ledger tracking post-attack financial flows from official budgets to clandestine owners. If they found that ledger's location, they could show the money trail behind the war expansions. That might be the final nail in the coffin of the official story. They needed it, but time was short. Thus the manhunt overshadowed all. Helicopters roamed certain highways, random car searches increased, and the populace grew uneasy, sensing the government's fear that the leak might be real. Keane ducked from motel to motel, adopting new disguises. Soon, though, his luck would run out, or he'd have to risk a direct showdown, trusting the thunder of public outrage to keep him alive. Little did he realise, the watchers were about to tighten the net, deploying a Black Ops team to ensure the leak never reached unstoppable momentum. If Keane couldn't outmaneuver them long enough to break the final evidence, the official illusions would remain intact. If he did, though, the entire structure of post-attack governance might collapse. The next moves would determine everything. The following week saw Thomas Keane evading watchers by day and collaborating with Sarah Voss by night, each meeting more urgent than the last. They discovered references to the Saturn Files scattered in older CIA memos. Allegedly, it was an encrypted database that meticulously traced the money funneling to defence contractors, oil conglomerates and political campaigns in the immediate weeks after the catastrophic event. If authentic, it would confirm the real motive behind the orchestrated false flag: indefinite war and profiteering. At a safe house borrowed from an old contact of Sarah's, they pored over these hints by lamplight. Among the digital shards was a location clue. a retired NSA facility on the outskirts of a southwestern desert, defunct but rumoured to store old backups. We find that offline archive, Sarah said. We can copy the Saturn files in raw form. That's the smoking gun. Keane nodded, though dread of infiltration weighed on him. Between them, they had minimal resources, a battered car, a few $1,000s in cash and a handful of laptops. The Watchers, on the other hand, had near limitless means. Drones, infiltration teams, access to every camera feed in the nation. But the Watchers didn't fully expect them to attempt a break-in at a presumably abandoned facility. So maybe the element of surprise worked in their favour. Director Eldridge Shaw ramped up the clampdown. The official narrative shaped the public mind. A rogue ex-FBI analyst has unleashed foreign-forged documents aimed at undermining national security. Many believed it, but a growing minority saw government overreach, especially after multiple suspicious accidents claimed the lives of other potential whistleblowers. People asked, if it's so false, why chase and kill so aggressively? In one instance, a known data archivist was found shot in his home, with the press labelling it a botched robbery, ignoring the data archivist's link to the leaked material. On social media, had black dust soared. Some city squares erupted in protest, carrying signs that read, "We deserve the truth," or "Stop killing our whistleblowers." The Watchers responded by intensifying arrests, calling them rioters. Keane tried to remain focused. He realised that if the Saturn files were real, it might show direct bank transfers from major corporate boards into the pockets of certain officials, all tied to legislation passing huge war budgets after the false flag. That would upend the entire post-attack establishment. No wonder they're stopping at nothing, Sarah murmured. Securing fake IDs, they travelled cross-country by back roads. Each motel they used for a single night, paying cash. They dodged major highways, suspecting license plate readers. The Watchers likely guessed their aim was to expose more data, but might not know the exact target. Meanwhile, the tension between them soared. The climate was near police state. Newscasts repeated that the domestic terrorist Thomas Keane must be turned in. Civilians were promised big rewards for tips. Billboards with Keane's face popped up along highways. He wore a baseball cap and used tinted glasses, but each day was a dice roll. A near encounter. On a lonely stretch, a black SUV sped behind them. They recognised the pattern. Sarah swerved onto a side route, forging through a small farmland path. The Watchers gave chase. Shots rang out, blowing a tyre. The car careened into a ditch. They scrambled out, hid among tall corn. The Watchers searched, but eventually gave up, presumably to avoid a big scene. This brush with violent capture left them rattled, but also more resolved. "We're obviously on the right track if they're that desperate," Sarah said, breath shaky. Finally, after days, they reached the deserted perimeter of the old NSA outpost. It was ringed by a crumbling fence, a few rusted signposts. By the look of the cracked asphalt and weed-choked yard, it had been abandoned for over a decade. Perfect place to bury secrets. Under twilight, they found a corner of the fence cut open by looters. They slipped inside quietly. The main building rose in silhouette, windows boarded up. A stray coyote howled in the distance, wind carrying a faint metallic whistling from open vents. Inside, dust-coated floors. Old cubicles sat in disarray. They used flashlights to navigate. Eventually they located a sub-basement with battered computer racks. A few beeped faintly with emergency power. "There's power? That's suspicious," Keane muttered. Indeed, it suggested the Watchers might still be pulling some data from here. They approached a locked door labelled Server Vault Archive 6. With Sarah's phone, they scanned a partial code from the documents, generating a bypass sequence that might override older system locks. After multiple tries, a green light flickered. The vault door clunked open. Inside the vault, rows of drives and reels lined metal shelves. Dusty but humming with minimal climate control. They sifted through labels: Operation Cast Peak, Post-K-War Roster, Saturn. That was it. A battered cluster of servers with the word Saturn FSV. They carefully powered one terminal, hooking it to a laptop. Sarah typed a root command. The screen glowed. Restricted, Saturn 1, 2, 3, enter pass. They tried typical keywords from the docs. On the third attempt, a beep. Access. They were in, files scrolled, each referencing massive funding authorizations, building demolitions, insider trading, logs dated within days of the big attack. The scope was monstrous. It implicated high-level bureaucrats, big banks, and even a few journalists. They orchestrated the tragedy to galvanize fear, pass endless war budgets, feed the arms economy, Sarah whispered, stunned. All hidden under national security drapery. Some lines suggested hijackers were known assets used as a controlled ignition. The betrayal was staggering. In that hush, footsteps upstairs. The watchers had arrived, no doubt detecting the power usage. We must copy this now, Keane said, launching a data transfer to multiple external drives. Meanwhile, Sarah prepared to kill lights and hide, but the watchers rushed down, flashlights slicing through gloom. Gunfire echoed. Bullets pinged off server racks. Sarah huddled behind a console, returning fire with a small pistol she carried. Keane initiated an upload, hooking the server to a secure satellite link via a portable router. The watchers advanced. He typed frantically, the progress bar inching along, transmission at 10%. Then Director Shaw himself stepped in. "Stop!" he roared, voice reverberating in the metal corridor. "Keane, you have no idea what you're unleashing. The stability of entire alliances depends on burying that day's complexities." Shots resumed. Sarah took a graze to her shoulder, but kept the watchers pinned. The bar reached 50%. Shaw barked an order to lob a small explosive. They tossed a flashbang. The ear-shattering pop disoriented them. The watchers closed in, tackling Sarah. Another pinned Keane. The laptop screen cracked under a boot. The upload froze at 80%. In the struggle, Keane twisted free, smashing a guard's face with the laptop, which ironically forced the laptop back to life. The watchers tried to pull cables. Meanwhile, a stray bullet hit a server coolant line. Steam hissed. The infiltration team realized this was too risky. The entire place might go up. Shaw advanced on Keane, gun raised. "You can die here with your illusions, or you can vanish quietly. The truth will never see daylight." Suddenly an explosion from the coolant line triggered a chain reaction in the old power system. Fire licked the corners, sending watchers scrambling. Sarah crawled to safety. Keane battered, saw the upload bar at 98%. He roared in defiance, pressing a final keystroke to confirm. The system beeped success. The watchers realized the data had been sent out, unstoppable now. Furious, one aimed at Keane's chest. A final shot rang out. Darkness overcame him. The watchers yanked the cable, but it was too late. The Saturn files had presumably reached a safe node on the open web. Alarms beeped. The facility's meltdown forced a hurried retreat. In the swirling smoke, Sarah was dragged away by an explosion's concussive wave. The watchers grabbed Shaw, retreating. The entire sub-basement collapsed in flame and dust. For all they knew, Keane perished under the rubble. But the watchers had lost the bigger war. The Saturn files were free. Within hours, a torrent of new evidence, the Saturn files, flooded the internet. Anonymous activists, archivists, and journalists worldwide mirrored the data. Even as official agencies tried to block or discredit it, the story soared across social media, overshadowing government censorship efforts. Original documents codenamed Operation White Dawn, some Project Switchboard, Commission for Filter some Rorsi, provided stark details. Insider collusion with extremist groups, advanced planning to ensure that attacks triggered panic and indefinite war mobilization, international reaction. Allies demanded urgent clarifications from Washington. Rival nations called for an emergency UN session. The general public, seeing internal memos where top officials weighed acceptable civilian losses for strategic advantage, reeled in fury. Large-scale protests ignited in multiple capitals. People demanded resignations. The entire intelligence apparatus faced the biggest crisis of legitimacy since the day it was formed. Meanwhile, the White House insisted the documents were tampered forgeries, but the mass of cross-corroboration was overwhelming. Anonymous data scientists validated digital signatures, timestamps, usage logs consistent with 20-year-old records. Even some mid-level intelligence employees, shaken by the revelations, publicly confirmed the authenticity. Back home, in the US, the meltdown was immediate. Rallies erupted outside major government buildings calling for arrests of those named in the files. Corporate board members from arms manufacturing companies faced lawsuits. The stock market dived, particularly for defence sector stocks. Over time, entire boards resigned, some fleeing the country. Various retired generals disclaiming involvement or giving partial confessions fueled headlines. The public found itself torn between anger, betrayal, and heartbreak, reliving the trauma of that fateful day under a horrifying new lens. Media torn. Some mainstream outlets quickly pivoted, acknowledging the new data as genuine after initial attempts to bury it. High-profile anchors apologised for previously parroting the official story. Others doubled down on patriotic narratives, ironically fueling further distrust. The swirl of disinformation versus actual data soared, but the raw evidence was too extensive to suppress. "You can't close the barn door after the horse has fled," a commentator said. "The entire architecture of post-attack policy is under question." Director Eldridge Shaw attempted a grand press conference to reassert authority, but the crowd drowned him in jeers. Calls for congressional hearings soared. In a last-chance effort, Shaw's office declared a national security emergency, urging martial law to keep order. That, ironically, only inflamed dissent. Certain states refused to cooperate. Over the next weeks, the old alignment of power began fracturing. Investigations launched from multiple angles, with newly emboldened lawmakers prosecuting those who orchestrated the post-attack expansions for personal gain. Sarah Voss emerged from the southwestern fiasco battered but alive. She revealed how Watchers had infiltrated that abandoned NSA site, how Keane died a hero finalising the upload. She published a moving column titled "One Man's Last Key Press," describing how, in a swirl of gunfire, Keane completed the Saturn files transmission, ensuring no one could bury it. The piece went viral, shaping the public's view of Keane as a tragic whistleblower who gave everything for the truth. At the local level, families of 9/11 victims demanded new trials. The old official commissions were discredited. People realised entire reams of contradictory evidence had been sealed. Even the original investigators admitted they'd been misled or threatened. The emotional toll soared once more. Many felt as though they'd been lied to for decades about the biggest national tragedy. A wave of introspection overcame the country. How had fear become so profitable, and how did good people allow it? Internationally, alliances that had supported the war on terror felt betrayed. Some withdrew forces from contested regions. Others launched their own parliamentary investigations, suspecting shared complicity. The world order that was shaped after the attack started crumbling, replaced by an uncertain future. Some dared to hope it meant a less militarized approach. Others worried that new extremist groups might exploit the chaos. In the midst of all this, rumours circulated that Thomas Keane might still be alive, sightings in some far-off place. Yet no concrete proof existed. Official statements considered him presumed deceased. If he survived, he might have chosen the anonymity of an unknown identity, having done what he set out to do. 6 months later, a massive Senate hearing convened. Top officials were subpoenaed. The public watched enthralled as ex-generals, ex-CEOs, and ex-administration figures from 20 years prior faced grilling. Some invoked national security, others pled the Fifth, while a few confessed partial roles. Indictments followed, though not all ended in convictions. The system was too vast, too intricately rigged. Yet the symbolic effect was undeniable. Never again would the official story be accepted unchallenged. At the same time, Sarah Voss launched an independent media platform broadcasting daily updates on the False Skies Inquiry. People from across the spectrum contributed testimonies, documents, or personal stories of how they'd suspect hush-ups. Freed from blacklists, she soared as a public figure, championing the cause of government accountability. A year after the Saturn Files meltdown, a new memorial was erected near the site of the original 9/11 tragedy. A statue depicting a single figure pressing a key, a reflection of Keen's final act. The inscription read, "They took truth from us in the shadows, he brought it back in the light." Visitors left flowers, some seeking solace that the realm of power had at least partially been unmasked. Epilogue. In a quiet coastal town, a fisherman swore he recognised a man from a circulated photo. Older, hair bleached by salt and sun, eyes weighed with sadness. The man told him he used to work for the government, but no more. He spoke of illusions and the cost of unveiling them. Then he vanished at sunrise, leaving only a single battered flash drive behind. If it was Thomas Keene, he apparently chose a wandering fate, letting the world handle the legacy of his bombshell leak. Public trust in large institutions remained shaken. Some remained furious, others hopeful that a new transparency might arise. In the corners of the internet, conspiracy watchers debate if the watchers still exist, planning new false flags. But for now, the greatest deception in modern times has been laid bare. The name Black Dust stands as a testament to the unstoppable power of truth once it's unleashed. In the hush that follows, the final note, they used fear to shape the world, but one day fear lost. The truth soared free, and the illusions that once cloaked the skies were shattered in a single day.